us away, Anna.
All righty. Thank you so much for joining us at our second annual summit. We're beyond excited to spend the next 2 days with all of you and would like to say a huge thank you to all of our attendees and our speakers for making this happen. We could not have done it without all of you. Over the next 2 days, we'll learn from leaders in the field and connect with all of you in our community. We're approaching this event with a deep exploration and commitment to inclusivity, and we'll talk more about what that exactly means and what to expect in just a few moments.
All right, thanks, Anna. Hey, everyone, it's Bevan. We're here with the rest of our team. You know us all by now, hopefully, but if not, we will walk on through all of us here at NaRCAD. I am the Deputy Director here at NaRCAD, joined by my fearless co-pilot, Anna Morgan-Barsamian, our Senior Manager of Training and Education. We are happy to be your MCs for the next 2 days and walk you through what is truly just a unique set of presentations, breakouts, just lots of engagement for you all to be thinking about how to apply in inclusivity and equity framework to the work you do in detailing, whether you're a program manager, a detailer, both, working on EPI, evaluating, any way that you contribute to the important work of academic detailing. We are here to be thinking about how we can do all of our work more equitably. So Anna and I are happy to say good morning. I will turn it over to Mike Fisher, who is at the helm of NaRCAD and has been since 2010. Good morning, Mike.
Thank you and good morning. And I guess technically good afternoon by 2 minutes to some of you. Welcome to the second summit. So excited you're here. As Bevan said, Mike Fisher, Director NaRCAD, and thrilled that we're coming up on 14 years and with an amazing team and an even more amazing community. So thank you for joining us. Really looking forward to 2 days together.
Thanks, Mike. And we will collectively say hello on behalf of Dr. Eborn, who will be joining us today. But for now, we wave on his behalf. Those of you who have not yet had a chance to meet him, hopefully you will be able to work alongside him virtually in some of the breakout sessions and hear from him in our audience. But he is one of the originators of academic detailing, wrote some of the original studies back in the 80s, and is a wealth of information about all things AD. And we did have a question in the chat. Thanks for answering that, Anshul. Folks want to know, is this recording going to be sent out? Yes, it is. If you don't want to be recorded, please pop your video off during the main sessions. Anna, did you want to say another quick hello before we turn it to our colleague Anshul?
I would love to. My name is Anna Morgan-Barsamian. I'm the Senior Manager of Training and Education at NaRCAD. I've been with the team for 5 years, and I have a background in nursing and public health. As I mentioned earlier, I am beyond excited to jump into this content with all of you over the next 2 days. And thank you all for being here. And I'll hand it over to Anshul.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Anshul Gupta. I'm the program coordinator at NaRCAD. Been with the team for 3 years now and really looking forward to the next 2 days with you all. We have lots of exciting workshops, presentations, speakers. And if you have any questions or need any support, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Thanks, Anshul. All right. So now Anna's going to tell you about our Summit Hub.
Yes, and Catherine set us up nicely for this. If you're unable to attend all the sessions, there is no need to worry. We have an AD Summit Hub where you'll be able to access all the presentation recordings and materials from the event. The workshops will not be recorded, but you can find slides and materials from all the workshops on the hub, and we'll ensure everything is posted and available for you within a week. All right, we have some housekeeping items we'd like to touch on before we get started. Please turn your video on. This will be an interactive event, and we like to see all of your beautiful faces. As Bevan mentioned, if you would not like to be recorded, turn your video off. Please use the chat box to ask questions throughout the event. We will do our very best to get to every question, either as a verbal response or response in the chat box. The chat box is also there for reflections and resource sharing. So at past events, we've had people add thoughts and reflections to the chat during presentations. We also love when people share links to resources that are being discussed, so please do use that chat box. Please make sure your Zoom name is correct and has your pronouns listed if you're comfortable. We want to ensure that we're referring to you the way that you would like us to. After the summit, we'll send an attendee contact list and add you to our mailing list. You can always opt out. Just reach out to Anshul by the end of day tomorrow to do that. If any technical issues come up for you over the next 2 days, please direct message Anshul and she'll help you out. You can also email her at anshul.gupta@bmc.org. As we mentioned, this is an interactive session, so Bevan is going to tell you how we will run discussions and Q&A sessions.
All right, so when you see this slide pop up on your screen, it means it's time for Q&A. You are by no means beholden to keep your Q&A just to this slide. If you have a question while someone's talking, please throw it into the chat box. I will say that at NaRCAD, we pride ourselves at having around a 98% success rate at getting to everyone's questions. And if we do not get to them, as Anna mentioned, we will triage them, make sure we get them over to the speakers you wanted to ask the questions of, and just make sure that everyone finds a way to get their burning questions answered. So again, please go ahead and sprinkle your thoughts, reflections, any literature you want to share. If someone wants to know, hey, where did that factoid come from, into the chat box. We'll also say that Anshul is incredible at dropping links like it's hot into that chat box. And she will also be keeping a compilation of those links that you will receive at the end of the event in our post-event email. So don't scramble if you haven't cut and pasted everything that pops into the chat box. But please know we treat our links like seriously. Okay, so Anna and I are going to tell you what you can expect beyond what you can read in our program book, a little bit of what the flavor is of this experience of our summit. Anna, over to you.
Yeah, here's the inside scoop. So we're going to be talking about the patient experience and why that's so important to use qualitative data and how we can get voices into our materials. We're going to be talking about implicit bias, how to self-test for implicit bias. We're going to be discussing AD adaptations, building confidence, and infectious diseases.
All right, we're also going to be talking about health disparities, social determinants of health. We're going to be focusing on some sub areas that we find particularly exciting to bring into the day-to-day conversation, which is where they should be, which includes how can clinicians provide gender affirming care? How can we help clinicians break down clinical silos where they feel, hey, if this isn't part of my job or I don't know what to do, I'm kind of lost. How can we help them do better work there? How can we connect them to community partnerships? And our own Mike Fisher will be talking about equitable data. Where can we find it? What can we do if we can't find it? And how can we be transparent about the challenges we have around data and do the best that we can while also pushing forward to try to lead the field into a more equitable space? So lots of really interesting sprinkles, including your own contributions, which are as important as our presentation. So please do share anything that you have in mind. We do have some hands-on workshops. Anna, let's talk about what we have going on today, this afternoon.
So we have 3 workshops today. You can choose one workshop to attend. And our first workshop on the screen here, if you're new to academic detailing or you want a refresher on the foundations, this AD 101 workshop is for you. I'm going to be co-facilitating this session with one of my wonderful colleagues, Nicole Seymour from the Center for Effective Practice in Canada. And Bevan is going to lead our second workshop. And what do you have in store for people, Bevan, on that workshop?
We're going to be talking about how we can look beyond quantitative data. We love our quantitative data. It's amazing. Mike's going to geek out more on data this afternoon, but we also want to talk about the power of patient stories. We want to talk about honoring patient voices, their unique experiences, and treating them as the experts in their own experiences. So if you join me and my amazing colleague, Adrian, she will be Adrian Apicelli. She and I will be talking about how can you get to those patient voices, ask them who they are and what they need, and then sprinkle those voices into your detailing campaign, the materials you use, the conversations you have with clinicians. How do you do it, and how do you do it cost effectively? So do join us for that. And last but not least, we have this one here in orange.
Handling stigmatizing conversations, responding to clinicians with integrity. So whether you are new or experienced in academic detailing, you'll gain something from this session. You'll come away with the skills you need to navigate sensitive topics. And our colleagues Trish Ron from the Center for Effective Practice and Jess Alward from the state of New Hampshire will be leading this workshop.
Please do join. Any one of these will be fun. If you are a person who goes to the movies and likes to sneak in and out of different theaters, we encourage you not to do this go around. Having some consistency will be great. And if you really are upset that you missed out and it's not being recorded, come talk to us. Maybe we can, share a little bit behind the scenes, hop on a call with you, let you know what you missed. All right, so what else is on the menu? As we mentioned, this is a high interactivity event. Those of you who are trying to kind of keep your eye on your email or do something else at the same time, we salute you, but we also hope that you can give yourself some concentrated time with us over the next 2 days, because you're the leaders. Your creative solutions really matter here. So again, we don't want this to be a passive event. We wish we were together in a space with you. But this is, for what it is, our virtual spaces. We really, really love having this connectivity. We love doing tangible skill building. You will be creating stuff that goes on our website as long as it is about academic detailing. We'll be doing community networking, making sure you all can turn to each other as much as possible. We know that it's not the same as being around the water cooler or the coffee zone at an in-person conference. But again, you'll get each other's contact info. And a lot of times after things like this, we get emails. Hey, do you know, who was that Nicole person from Toronto? And we'll say, oh, she's awesome. We can connect you with her. So learning from each other is always the most important thing. At NaRCAD, we are the conveners and we are the librarians of all the things happening on the ground, but you all are the ones who know what is happening and can speak to it. So please know there is more than plenty of space for you over the next couple of days. Anna's going to talk to you about what's in our program book next, and we are getting close to getting into the good stuff. So Anna, over to you.
All right, check out our program book for bios and headshots of our presenters and our team. Our program agendas in there, descriptions for the workshops, blog posts, and information about upcoming events and all things happening at NaRCAD you can find in that program book. Our fabulous program coordinator, Anshul, did a wonderful job putting that together for us. Here's what's in store for today. We're going to hear from leaders in the field in a live interview format in just a few moments. You'll choose your workshop session and network with peers. We'll hear about innovative approaches to AD from our colleagues in Chicago. And we have a special presentation from our very own Dr. Mike Fisher as he discusses looking at data through an equity lens.
All right, so now we're ready to hear from you. We're done yakking for a minute. We will be yakking for the next couple of days, but we want you to yak too. This time with your fingers, so pop on over to the chat box. Let's just wake us up, even those of us on the East Coast, we need to wake up a little bit in the middle of the day. What is something that motivates you in life? It does not have to be about work unless you want it to be. So pop that in the chat box. All right, thank you, Dave, for helping us out. Arizona, represent, helping others, advocating for others. Uh-oh, we have a theme of helping. That is such a surprise. Here we go, Daniela, vacation to the shore, native gardening. Wonderful, Carista. My children in their future, ice cream, making a better life for my cats. Love that, Maddie. Positive energy, helping others. Amy says, David, you typed faster than me. Kendra says, justice. Each day being a little bit better than the last. Thank you, Jackie Travers. Amen to that. Ryan says access to high quality healthcare for all, success, watching sports, seeing people smile, making people smile rather. And Victoria is very good at that. Abby says connecting with my community. We've got performing in community theater, impacting underserved communities, helping others, beautiful weather, always learning, supporting the needy, football, cannoli, and collaboration. Making positive change, sharing a smile, reaching new goals, cooking and grilling, my parents, gardening. We're going to hook Carissa and Carla up to do some native gardening. The outdoors, sunshine, fulfillment from helping others, and seeing my vegetable garden flourish. We've got themes here. We're loving the smiles, the sunshine, the gardening, and the helping, and also the snacking, the family, and cheering other people on. Wonderful stuff. All right, now we're going to switch gears and start thinking about what we're here for today. Anna, over to you.
When you hear the word inclusivity, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Choose a word or phrase and pop that into the chat. Trish is starting us off with no one left behind. Everyone, including everyone, challenging, accessibility, belonging, listening. Hard to truly achieve. We're here to try to do that, Jess. Acceptance, safety, equity. I'm going to read a few more here. These are all amazing. Community, fair. Oh, I like that, Carla. Comfy environment for all. No one feels left out. Equity, interprofessional, community, intentional. Embracing everyone's differences. Thank you all.
Dismantling barriers too. I love that one. Had to make sure we heard from Vishal on that.
Oh,
one.
yes. Thank you.
Wonderful stuff. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how we at NaRCAD are defining this, and keep those definitions in the chat box going, guys. They're wonderful, especially around diverse voices and representation. Carrie's giving us examples that we're hopping right into: race, ethnicity, accessibility, age. What we mean when we talk about inclusion here at NaRCAD, and we hope you all will sync up with us, and we can sync up with you too if you have more to add, is this definition adapted from the American Psychological Association. An inclusive environment offers affirmation, celebration, and appreciation of different approaches, styles, perspectives, and experiences of all people. We want to go beyond just including and move towards affirmation, this celebration, this openness. So that's the angle we are coming from today and through all of our work that we try to do here at NaRCAD. And Anshul has just dropped this page that we have screenshotted here, so you can read more about the APA's EDI conceptual framework. It's a wonderful read. We encourage you to check that out. So as we move forward, oh, and let me pop back. We want to make sure that we say here at NaRCAD, we've really worked hard to look at the work that we are doing and what we want to offer to all of you in our community, to have it go beyond checking a box, to have it go beyond a performative way of saying, yes, we have done something that ticks the diversity box. And so I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk about how we're committing to doing that moving forward.
We are making a commitment right here, right now with all of you. This event is not a one-time discussion for inclusivity. We will use inclusivity as a lens for all of our work moving forward, and we will help support you to do the same. We will continue to request and listen to feedback from all of you to help inform our work. And we are very excited to make this commitment in front of all of you right now.
And we hope you'll join us. So Anna's going to talk a little bit about some stuff we know you all know, but we want to get level set on. Anna, over to you.
So we're going to take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. How does the physician workforce break down? And what's the breakdown of the people who you're talking to every day look like? So 37.6% of physicians are female, and less than 1% of US medical students and physicians self-identify as transgender or gender non-binary. We have also included a breakdown of race from the Association of American Medical Colleges, with the majority of physicians being white at 56.5%, followed by Asian at 18.8%. And type Y or N in the chat box if this breakdown represents what you're seeing in the field or represents your own interactions with the health system. As I continue on, I'd love to know if this resonates with all of you.
Y for yes, N for no. Question if you're not sure.
And I see a lot of Y's in there. So let's zoom back in. Our team at NaRCAD conducted a survey as part of a 5-year project. We sent a survey out to over 3,000 health professionals. that were academic detailers or affiliated with an AD program. You may have remembered receiving this survey, and we're in the process of analyzing all the data, but we've pulled out some of the demographics. And Bevan, over to you to start breaking those demographics down for everyone.
All right, so this one surprised us that we have a life spectrum of detailers and supporters. So it's very exciting to know that hopefully folks who are just turning 18 will commit their lives to detailing. I'm being silly, but we are glad to see that folks, who are generation, is it Z, are thinking about detailing, are being involved. We've got millennials. We've got, Gen Xers, we've got the boomers, we've got everybody committed here. We seem to have the largest chunk from, about mid-career. So no huge surprises there, just interest. Here's where we were particularly kind of not surprised, but excited to see that 73% of detailers are female. We did have a 3% chunk that were either other or preferred not to answer, and 24% identified as male. But we are a female-led field. And that's something that, we want at NaRCAD to really pay respect to ask women in our field what's going on from their perspective, to make sure that there are leadership positions for the majority of our detailing community. And make sure that everybody across the spectrum of gender has a voice. When we look at race, unfortunately, we have similar alignment with the physician workforce piece here, where our field is not diverse enough. We, at least looking at our survey, which was funded by AHRQ, we found out that folks who are part of our community and are connected to detailing, either by being direct detailers or program managers, 3/4 of them about are white. So we want to make sure that we are inviting more diverse folks to, as a community, to become detailers, to become trained, to share their experiences, especially coming from a whole host of backgrounds. We're starting to see that detailers are also sometimes have had experience being patient navigators, patient advocates. So really, the more we look at diverse entry points for detailers, we are more able to diversify our field, which is so critical, because similarly to wanting a physician workforce to reflect patients, which they do not currently, we want our field to represent patients. We want there to be more alignment there. So with that in mind, we are going to speed up and get right into our first session in just a moment, but we want to talk about what's going well. So Anna, over to you to talk about our summit and where we're going.
Yes, we are proud to announce that 95% of our speakers at this summit event over the next 2 days are folks of color, women, or queer folks. We see this event as a concentrated space for discussion. And as we mentioned before, this will be an ongoing discussion that we'll be having. This is not a one-time event. We still have a ways to go, and there's no end to any of this work, as Bevan mentioned. So thank you all for being here with us and working on this with us and learning alongside us. Bevan is going to tell you about some immediate steps that we can take.
So as we're thinking about how we can do this together, we want to say that here at NaRCAD, we love us some constructive criticism. Please come to us at any point and tell us, Bevan, you're missing the boat. Anna, you're missing the boat. Hey, we loved this. You need to do more of that. Let us know what's working. So inviting more diverse perspectives to all of our future learning events is one thing we're committed to. We have a new podcast series, and of course our best practices blog, which is 9 years old, I think this spring. We want to make sure all of the voices on our podcast and our best practices blog are from just a cross section of different lived experiences. We want to be transparent about what's not working in our field and try to shine a light on where we think things should go next with your support. We want to make space always for new ideas, reflection, and discussion. And we want to be intentional. What does that mean? We want to communicate what we value, and we want to value what you and others communicate. So we will be able to do our best, as we go with what we know, but if we don't know something, we want you to tell us. So please consider as you go through the next 2 days and through any of our programming moving forward, that your voice really does matter. And so with that said, I am so jazzed to invite you to kick off our first event in the event. It's our Leadership Spotlight. It is a live interview with two amazingly talented women who, I have to admit, on a personal and professional level, I sweat. I think they are just so cool. So here to join us is Carla Foster and Sarah Popish. If you don't know their work, I am happy to introduce you. So Carla Foster is an epidemiologist. She's a PI at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in the Healthcare Provider Initiatives Unit. She leads the development, implementation, and evaluation of citywide public health detailing campaigns. You gotta check out New York's kits. We will drop that in the chat box at some point during this session. Carla's awesome. She's got a deep commitment to understanding the impact of intersecting biases, racism, breaking down white supremacy culture, and seeing the impact of that culture on collective physical and mental health. She's spoken to our audiences in the past about race, social determinants of health, clinician stigma, and she's joining us today to share her experiences and reflections on many things, but mostly how we can look inward, how we consider the power of our own language, how we can encourage clinicians to really honor patients' individual experiences and work to build truly collaborative partnerships with their patients. So we all look up to Carla here at NaRCAD. We're excited to learn from her today. Quick hello from you, Carla, and then I'll introduce Sarah. But good morning, good afternoon.
Hi, and thanks so much for that introduction. It's so wonderful to be here with you all, the NaRCAD team. I think you are all are rock stars and absolutely amazing. And I'm looking forward to this.
Thanks, Carla. And with Carla is Dr. Sarah Popish. She is incredible. She's a clinical program manager for the VA's academic detailing service. She's been working on AD for the last 13 plus years, and she's led a ton of AD training programs for the VHA. She actually presented at NaRCAD 2023 about the Amazing Jedi program, which is an incredibly inspiring, rejuvenating training program to boost morale for detailers. Sarah has such a refreshing series of takes on what matters in building a sustainable team, strong programming, and she's here today to share what's been seen by her and her team in terms of health disparities that the veteran population are facing, especially the rural veterans, and how she's working with her colleagues to close those gaps. She's an incredibly dynamic speaker and inspiring thinker, very much admired by our community, and she also happens to enjoy the show Outlander as much as I do. So without further ado, welcome, Sarah. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. I forgot about our connection about Outlander, but that is a good show.
It's a great one. It's a great one. Coming to a close. I'm going to have to find something else to do with my life. All right. So we wanted to just share that both Carla and Sarah have nothing to disclose, that Sarah is sharing that the views and opinions that she expresses are as a panel member, not official position of the US government. All right. Oop, pardon me. So I'm going to pull out of this deck so that we can see each other's faces and really just dive into this interview. What this is going to look like, those of you who are at the chat box and at the ready, is please go ahead and put any questions in the chat as we go. I'm going to triage those questions like it's a live radio show as we go. So do not hesitate to pop something in the box. You have these two experts held captive for the next little bit. So let's make the most of our time. While you're thinking about what you want to ask them, I know what I want to ask to kick off. So there was a question at the beginning of our presentation this morning that Anna asked. When you hear the word inclusivity, what do you think of? Sarah, I really want to turn that to you because I know we've spoken in the past about what inclusion means, particularly for your work at the VHA and the sort of subpopulations of veterans that need the most care. So can you speak to us a little bit about what inclusion looks like and should look like at the VHA, in your opinion?
So, in my opinion, I think when we think about inclusivity, I really go to the treatment of our veterans who struggle with substance use disorder, specifically those who live in rural environments. About 1/3 of our veterans live in rural environments, and about 53% or higher of our veterans actually will, over their lifetime, struggle with a substance use disorder. And one of the areas that I actually am very proud of in the VA is they really focus in on this no wrong door type of mentality. So we have been utilizing our detailers to spread information to our clinicians about the treatment of substance use disorders. So a veteran, no matter where they go, can get the help that they need. In fact, we just had one of our detailers share to the executive leadership in the VA a hero story in which, because she had been talking about the treatment of opioid use disorder for so long, a veteran actually came in to a primary care clinician in a rural clinic and said, I need help, I'm ready. That clinician had no clue how to start it, but he had her as a lifeline. And through her, they were able to get that veteran the help he needed that day so that that individual did not walk out the door and continue to use or have an overdose, but they were able to get them treatment right where they were at. So when I think about inclusivity, that is one of the things I think about. The other thing I think about is how we are really focusing a lot of efforts in the VA towards those rural individuals, because we know if you live in a rural area, one, there's more stigma associated with mental health disorders and substance use disorders. And it also, I think, there's less resources. So you may not even have the broadband that you need. You're not going to have the clinicians that you're going to need. And even on a personal level, it's just completely different. We just moved to a more rural area, and being able to find providers is a lot more difficult to even get in to see them. And we're not in that rural of an area. So I think that is something that, we need to work on. And the VA is putting together things like clinical resource hubs. So if you do not have the capability to actually treat the person in your clinic, you have a resource that they can use, and they make centers where they can go in and use the capabilities, the internet connectivity in these centers. They have people who go out and drive people to their appointments. And from our academic detailing service, we have a lot of data and resources that highlight the detailers' reach towards rural veterans. So we used to say rural clinicians, but really what we now look at is rural veterans, because sometimes a clinician will also see people in an urban setting and a rural setting. And so what we want to see is, through that interaction, what percentage of our population that lives in a rural area is impacted. And it is something that we build all sorts of resources about, we talk about all the time, because we really want to make sure that our veterans that are in urban centers and in our rural centers are getting the best up-to-date care that we can possibly provide within the VA. And I think that we're making good strides. I really do. But there's always room to improve.
That's amazing, Sarah. And I think one thing that really stood out to me about what you just said is this idea of really making sure that clinicians can adapt and be flexible to different patients with different needs from different settings, so that there's more of a sense, there's less of a silo and more of a sense of, okay, what are we doing with, how do we pivot when we're dealing with patients who are more rural? What are the types of stigma that they're facing? And with that in mind, there's a great question from Ryan Anderson in Arizona here, who wants to know, have you found that providers are willing to adopt harm reduction practices and talk to patients about harm reduction, which, as we know, comes with its own sort of potential stigma being received by clinicians, and how that stigma meets the stigma of a rural space? I'm wondering what you would want to share in reaction to that question.
So we're not there yet. It is growing. It is actually one of our national campaigns. We have a whole bunch of information on harm reduction practices. I know that our detailers actively talk about harm reduction all the time. I mean, when it comes to utilizing overdose techniques like NaRCAD, we dispense a lot of that, but there's other things that there is a lot of stigma about. And, actively, we have many programs that focus in on this, and they're continuing to push forward. Obviously, sometimes because we are a national entity, we are very limited in some states. Like there's only so much you can do because it's still against the law. And we cannot break state laws in some instances. But I think that we are making great progress. And I do believe in a lot of ways it is our academic detailers who are actually leading that push as they continue to talk about the importance of treating substance use disorders and obviously engaging in a harm reduction.
That's excellent. And I think the important thing there is to hit on, we're not there yet, but we're moving forward. And the idea of detailers leading that charge. Those of you who join us for the whole of the next few days will see just a plethora of feedback from interventions, AD interventions around academic detailing for harm reduction that have been truly sensational in moving things forward in the past year in particular. So thank you, Sarah, for speaking to that. Want to welcome Carla and say that we can, kick off asking you a first question. Similar to Sarah, when you think about inclusivity, what is the first thing you think of in terms of the gaps that exist for patients in the New York area? And a bit from you, I would love you to share some of the really great stuff you've shared with us around opportunities to close some of those gaps, especially with, the power of language. So if you can speak to any of that, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I think that a major gap and really a foundational barrier to health equity is that our current healthcare system really focuses on treating the symptoms or the outcomes of disease as opposed to addressing root causes. And this is really a reactionary approach, and it neglects societal factors and environmental influences that really drive a lot of these health issues. And to truly improve patient outcomes, healthcare needs to shift towards an understanding or an intervening on the why behind some of these poor health outcomes. So asking what are the originating factors that gave rise to this health outcome? In fact, in one of our focus groups that we conducted last year, a large proportion of the community members present expressed frustration with healthcare being this sort of band-aid as opposed to a root cause or preventative care focus. So this is not something that is going unnoticed. And I think in order to achieve a effective paradigm shift, it's going to take looking at the whole patient, looking at their story, their environment, their unique situation. And by focusing on some of the origin factors, I think healthcare providers are really able to develop treatment plans that are more sustainable and tailored to that person. And this allows us to address not only immediate health concerns, but would also help to empower patients to make informed decisions and to be able to take an active role in their own well-being. And building trust and understanding the difference between trust and trustworthiness, I think, is something that's also really crucial. Healthcare systems should focus on being trustworthy by demonstrating transparency, compassion, and competence, as opposed to simply demanding trust from a population, especially a population that has been marginalized. And I want to pull up or read a quote from our health commissioner, Dr. Vassan. We just started a new initiative to extend life expectancy in New York City to 83 years by 2030. And he states that this plan starts with one fundamental truth that we all have to accept. Healthcare, while critical, is only part of the solution. Most estimates suggest that clinical care contributes only about 10 to 20% to overall health. Most of the rest is attributable to social, economic, environmental, and behavioral factors. So it's time we recognize and invest a proportional amount on prevention. And I think that really goes to the importance of being able to figure out what is really going on that drives some of these health issues and being able to impact change there.
That's incredible, Carla, and would love if you have a moment to drop that nugget in the chat box and you know the link to it, because I know I'm going to want to dig into it, and if I know the rest of our community, they're going to want to dig into it too. But I loved what you had to say too about the difference between saying you're trustworthy and then demonstrating your ability to be trustworthy through transparency. Can you give me an example of what that might look like? And I gather it's not going to be one act that makes a marginalized group say, okay, I'm going to trust a very, you know, white run healthcare system that has not made it particularly safe for me in the past. But can you give an example of one step in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that's really important to point out. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of feelings about whether or not trust should be given or is warranted is based upon people's very recent or very current experiences with the healthcare system. It's not, it could be partially based on things that have happened historically, but most often, in most cases, it's people who have current and very recent experiences not feeling like they can trust the people who are charged with providing them care. So like you said, one of the things I think that is important is overall diversity, making sure that patients have the ability to connect with healthcare professionals that have similar backgrounds and experiences. We do see that in particular for patients that are racialized as Black, they have better health outcomes when their healthcare provider is also racialized as Black. It doesn't hold true for patients racialized as white. They tend to receive, they tend to have the same or very similar health outcomes. And I think that holds true for people who are racialized as Asian as well. But I think in terms of being able to, on a population level, be able to establish trustworthiness is making sure that the interactions that you have with a population are trustworthy and that they are truly collaborative. I feel like a lot of times people in positions like myself and my colleagues, we are thinking of ways that we can enact change without actually knowing if that change is something that is needed or if it's the change that needs to be prioritized. And the ways that we go about doing that, I think, can often be very opaque if we're not actually living that experience. And so I think it really takes, and this is something that you touched upon at the very beginning, talking about one of the upcoming sessions, is being able to really take into account mixed methods approaches. So not only having this quantitative data, perhaps about health outcomes, but what are some of the qualitative data that we need to understand and to know that can help us not only understand what questions should be asked, but what is the meaning of some of our quantitative data, because the meaning might be different than what we assume it to be. And so I think having community-led research, community-led development of research topics is something that's really critical. That's something that we are not doing to the extent that I would like us to do, but that we are focusing on. And we work very closely from the very start of our detailing campaigns, including conceptualizing what the campaign topic will be, through all of the analyses with our community partners to make sure that we are truly collaborating and not sort of doing a sort of like superficial collaboration.
That's so important. And I want to reflect back because you just were spitballing some really juicy stuff. And so I want to grab some of the nuggets there. I really want to hit on that piece that you said around making sure you're going in the direction that is actually right for a community, that is actually right for a patient, versus what it sounds like to me is just not making assumptions just based on data, not making assumptions based on talking to one patient one time. And so what that sounds like to me is just keeping the conversation always open. And again, treating communities and patients as the experts, not just kind of saying, oh, we'll get your feedback once or twice, or we'll make sure we run this by you, but actually having them at the helm side by side is so key. So thank you for that. And what I want to do is grab a question from the audience and throw it to both of you. So I'm going to start with Sarah, and then I'll bounce it back to Carla. We have a great question from Jess Alward, who does detailing work on infectious disease in New Hampshire and is also one of our trainers. She says, do you feel that the backgrounds and lived experiences of the detailers plays an important role in helping providers embrace the idea of a more inclusive practice? I love this question, Jess. Sarah, what's your immediate take on that?
Absolutely. I think all of our experiences are what we walk by, right? That's where we come from, and they influence how we react to things, how we talk about things. And so, if you have a lived experience and you can actually delve into that and share it with somebody, that really is a lot more powerful than just sprinkling the top of this is some information, this is what I've heard. So I really do believe that wherever you come from, that truly influences how you can deliver information and even some of your passion behind it as well. I go to suicide prevention. We know that suicide prevention, especially in the VA, is really important. And when we first started talking about suicide prevention, I can't tell you how many of our detailers, leadership in pharmacy were like, what are we going to do about this? This has nothing to do with us. We don't need to touch this. And yeah, because of, we're not therapists, maybe we can limit medications, but there's not a lot of evidence behind that. Why would a pharmacist come talk to me about this? However, we have noticed now, because we raised awareness and through lived experiences of having loved ones or friends who have gone through suicidal ideation or have died by suicide, that all of a sudden the message changes. The passion is much bigger. And these individuals who were the loudest naysayers are now the ones that are putting together the most important products, and their area that they're practicing in is leading in outreach on suicide prevention. So yes, absolutely. I think that we all walk different paths, and that path really influences how we see the world.
Incredible. Yes, I've never thought about it in quite that way. And that just serves to further bolster a lot of the, I don't want to call it marketing, but the sort of underlying themes we try to impart with detailers who are with us today, who join us during our community check-in calls, that who you are is not just okay to bring to your detailing visits. It's sort of critical, especially if there is a passion there. And, when I hear you said sprinkling, it made me think of what Carla said about just, Carla, you used some sort of example that involves something with your hands, but it also implied something around, just a surface level, right? We don't want to be surface level. These are people's lives we're dealing with. And what a great way to look at something where a pharmacist might say, well, what impact could I possibly have on suicide prevention? And then to show them, oh, it's an incredible impact. So thank you for sharing that on the fly, Sarah. Going to throw the same question to you, Carla. How is who we are as detailers important when meeting with clinicians and trying to move the needle on inclusivity? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think especially if you're able to produce a very diverse, in terms of many different aspects, detailing group, then that allows your targeted healthcare providers to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the topic, simply from their lived experiences. And I also think that it provides an opportunity potentially to see people who are not often in positions of leadership. And I would say that being a detailer is one. You're here to offer increased knowledge to a healthcare provider, to see them in that position. And I think there's something that's very powerful about that. And I think going back to this idea of getting comprehensive information and being able to see various perspectives is getting us to this idea about how language creates realities. And I think, language not only creates, but it also reinforces our reality. So, for example, at the health department, we have started using the terminology people who are racialized as opposed to people who are Asian, people who are Latino, because people are not actually Black or, white, to use a common example, but they are racialized as such. And race is a myth, and the idea of race has real effects, and that it provides a cover to racism, and either it privileges or provides barriers to people based upon how they are racialized. And I think when speaking with people according to racialized classifications and presenting data that are stratified by race, we should really practice this highlighting of racialization. So, for example, I encourage people, instead of referring to white patients, we can more accurately describe a group by saying patients racialized as white. And being intentional about the language that we use as detailers should also extend beyond that of racial classification. So, for example, when discussing gathering support for a project, it may be more impactful to refer to investors and investing instead of saying gaining buy-in. Instead of referring to culturally informed or trauma-informed care, we should refer to culturally responsive or trauma responsive care. And these are words that really serve to create the reality that they refer to. And I think that, we probably could all agree that we'd rather engage with a person who is not just trauma informed, for example, but who also is able to be trauma responsive, which conveys action as opposed to passivity.
That's really, really helpful. And it also leads me to think about or to speak about something that we really want to bring up here at NaRCAD, which is, language is ever changing. That's not something new to any of us. And so one thing, I mean, this is new to me, Carla, we always look to you just because you really are at the cutting edge of a lot of this work, as is your team. When we think about our own language as detailers going in to have these sessions, and to reframe language, those of you who may join this afternoon's workshop on connecting with clinicians who may use stigmatizing language, and the reframe, how do you reframe? How do you know enough to understand why you're reframing? Really being curious, really being committed to understanding language and knowing that language will continuously morph, that there will be more and more information and data and resources and studies about what kinds of language are the most supportive and reflective and empowering, so that when folks say, well, why do I have to use this language, right? When folks say, I just can't keep up with all of this, being able to go at it with some data about how the language impacts and enforces and it empowers and uplifts patients is also really important. And so that's something that we at NaRCAD want to be able to continue to do, to have community meetings about, to kind of ponder some of these things, to look at sources, to look at who is doing this work and invite them to speak, invite them to challenge us and stretch our brains and hurt our brains about this kind of work. Because if our brains aren't being stretched, then we're not doing it right. Especially when it comes to language. Speaking more about language, I wanted to ask you a question, Carla, that I know we spoke about a few weeks ago. There's language, and then there's also, language is sort of external, right? It's an expression of what we think, what we see. It's a reflection of what we perceive. When it comes to using language to sort of take this external action to improve outcomes, to improve healthcare, what needs to happen first? Because you've talked to us before about internal reflection. And that's something that I think many of us may be in a conversation where we hear a clinician say something and our brain goes, ding, that's not right. That's stigmatizing. That's not the right language. But how do we reflect on our own internal process? How do we catch ourselves and our own biases in action before we take that external action? Would love some of your thoughts on
Yeah, and you definitely touched upon something that is, for me, really personally frustrating. I think when we begin looking at teams and agencies and organizations that are attempting to create externally facing projects and products without first doing that internal work and reflection, it means you're building something on a very shaky foundation. And in particular, with a lot of the focus that I have in my work on race and racism, I've encountered a very widespread lack of understanding about what race is, what racism is and is not, what human genetic variation is. And this includes among healthcare professionals. And to be clear here, race is a social classification that's based on assumptions about ancestry and appearance, and it's not a biological one. So racism essentially created race as a justification for colonization, exploitation, and enslavement. But race, should be noted, is not natural. It's not fixed. It is not based on biological differences. And so all of this makes it highly problematic and a really poor and inaccurate method for classification when we're doing our work. And I think the consequences of making something that is false real are really seen in pervasive health inequities. And as you said, it's really imperative for teams and organizations to embody the principles that they advocate externally. And this holds true in the context for anti-racist work. And so, although race is a fiction, it has become reified and has real consequences. And despite being a social construct, has these real world effects. So I think understanding that and being able to determine how it impacts access to privilege and to opportunity is the very beginning of being able to reflect upon how this thing is impacting not only the projects and the people and the places where we aim to make change, but is impacting ourselves. We can't divorce ourselves from that reality. And I think that if a team or an organization hasn't thoroughly examined and addressed its own internal biases, attempting to implement effective anti-racist practices or anti-stigma practices becomes an exercise in futility. And there becomes this disconnect between the external goals and the internal practices. And that creates a really hollow echo chamber. And without genuine self-reflection and commitment to dismantling internal biases, any external anti-racist efforts really fall flat and will lack authenticity and credibility. And I think, moreover, this inconsistency can perpetuate harm by reinforcing some of these very systems of oppression or stigma that the organization or team actually aims to oppose. And so I think that we also need to highlight how for individuals who are racialized as non-white or as anyone who is of a marginalized group, participating in such endeavors within a team that hasn't addressed its own biases can be profoundly stressful and detrimental to their well-being. And it really places an undue burden on them to navigate a space that may not be safe or supportive. And I have personal experience with this on teams that have been aimed at mitigating the impact of racism externally, but really fell short on examining how biases and harmful behavior interact within the team. And this led to several team members who were racialized as non-white being disengaged and leaving the team entirely, which then, of course, has a negative impact on our ability to produce quality and authentic work. And so being able to prioritize internal transformation involves cultivating a culture of self-awareness. So making sure it's something that touches all aspects of our work, creating that culture. having reflection, open dialogue, continuous learning. It requires that we all think critically about the ways that we may uphold stigma or white supremacy, and really stand together against some of these harmful practices, whether it's in terms of a structural oppression or within like everyday stigma or biases. And I think the most impactful anti-stigma and anti-racist activities take places in the places where we live, where we work, where we play. And I think understanding that it starts very locally, that it starts with us, it starts at home, is key to be able to take that first step. And it also must be said that trying to be clear about our own biases isn't easy. I am deeply engaged in this work, as well as in school, and it's difficult for me as well. And I think that even for scientists and healthcare professionals who have been trained, to follow the scientific method and engage in a skeptical analysis of the world around them, this can really be a challenge, because regardless of profession, most of us are not trained to recognize our own biases, which is essentially like the air that we breathe. And so the initial work is really a challenge, but it is work that can be done and really must be done if we are to live in a society that's free of biases and stigma. And I have to applaud the entire NaRCAD team for centering this work and being able to start this conversation and think about actionable ways for us individually and as a group to move forward, and focusing on creating a more equitable field in terms of healthcare. And Ryan, the book Racism Not Race is an excellent book. I was going to recommend it again today. I can drop the title. It's called Racism Not Race.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just for everyone who was just listening and not watching, in the chat box, Ryan Anderson just said that he heard Carla speak in the past and recommended the book Racism Not Race. So Carla, while you're looking for a link to that, I want to reflect on all of the good stuff you just said as much as I possibly can. I think one thing that's so key to admit is when we're in over our heads. And I would take a guess that many of us feel over our heads in areas like this. So some of this is, very much rooted in academic theory, trying to find, get down to the base of what is race and these constructs. And those are things that we at NaRCAD can't do over the next 2 days. So we want to just be clear about, what our limitations are. But what we are committed to is saying when we don't know something, and to say it's not enough anymore to say we don't know, so we're not going to look at it. And I think that's where we were here at NaRCAD 5 years ago. Gee, this is coming up a lot. We don't know what we're doing, right? And instead of kind of hiding behind the we don't know what we're doing, coming out and saying, can we all talk about what we think we know, what we want to know, what we are afraid to know, what we need to look at, what we don't know how to look at. And so what Carla was saying about the detrimental impacts of not being able to understand your own biases and then go in and put a lot of work into something with a lot of structure that is meant to help but ends up harming, is a way of unintentionally continuing to have a negative impact, and continuing to, without meaning to, create harm. And so I recommend that where we can all start, especially if any of you are as overwhelmed as I know that I've been in areas of this, especially as a white person who wants to be an ally and doesn't know where to start, is to keep trying to break down information into digestible nuggets and look for an actionable piece. I will say, and again, we know that 95% that we said of the program that is folks who are diverse. Unfortunately, the the session I want to plug again is our one non-diverse speaker, which is Mike Fisher, our white male. But I will say one thing he is looking at this afternoon that is the beginning of a conversation is, how do we start building our interventions, thinking about the systemic issues with acquiring data that is not free of bias? What do we do to try to start working with that? And so again, for those of you who may have a very black and white or all or nothing approach to things, and you want to figure out how to do it before you do it right, so that you don't cause damage and so that you don't get it wrong, many of us are going to have to continue and to embrace being part of a think tank, to be part of a group that continues to say, hey, I'm lost. Hey, I think I got somewhere. So please do stand by us with that and each other. Carla, looking to you for guidance is something that we want to do, while also not making it your job to inform the rest of us, because you are a woman of color, to tell us what we should be doing as a group who is predominantly white, right? So we need to be looking at all of this. We need to be talking about all of this, and we need to be thinking about how can we day by day involve ourselves in somehow acquiring more information and letting it kind of move around in our brains. And with the acquiring information, it's always training, right? So I want to go back to our training expert here, Sarah from the BHA, who I know, Sarah, you do lots and lots of training. Would you say it's sort of the bulk of your job? How much would you say it makes up of the work you do?
Training is the majority of what I do, either as didactic learning through national presentations that we get detailers to share their nuggets on, or it's running smaller trainings to upskill them on communication skills or specific topics. So yes, I would say the majority of what I do is training. It's probably about at 75%.
Okay, so in that training, and I know you just said that you went to a training on inclusive language recently. How was that for you? Did you go to that training and feel like you had some nuggets to work with? Did it fall flat? Where do you see like space for certain kinds of training that's desperately needed?
I found it very, very valuable, because I think, especially now that I'm living in the South, like it's really ingrained into us to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, or Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so when you're calling somebody. And really what we need to do is ask individuals how they like to be referred to. So how do you like me to refer to you as? Some people may have a different name that they prefer you utilize, versus perhaps they have a dead name. And if it's still in the chart as their dead name, you could immediately shut them down when you're engaging in patient care if you don't ask. But you also have to be very gentle with asking as well, because we have diverse generations and opinions in their beliefs about using different language and inclusivity. And so you also have to make sure that the way you ask is very general. How can I make you feel safe and respected? I mean, stuff that is very general, very open, not a check mark answer of, what is your sexual orientation? Just general questions like that, because that can also, for some people, it can make them feel included. And for others, it may turn them away from the situation based on their lived experience and what they've gone through. And they're also on the journey of learning as well.
I really appreciate that. What you're talking about is, again, stepping away from a demographic approach. Where do you fit in? What boxes can we squeeze you as a patient into, or even you as a clinician into, when we are looking at, collecting data from whom we've spoken with? And I just wanted to clarify too, the piece about dead naming. I'm pretty sure maybe a lot of folks here know this. This was relatively new to me. The piece of not calling someone by their birth name if they have changed their name to more appropriately reflect the gender expression that they've chosen. So again, Sarah really hits on something important. In just one moment, any of us, but particularly clinicians, may break down a sense of trust between themselves and a patient by doing something that is not I want to use the right language from Carla now, culturally, not just informed, but culturally responsive. And asking a question that sounds so simple, but is so powerful. I want to repeat this back that Sarah just said. How can I make you feel safe and respected? That is an incredibly powerful question that you could ask anybody with whom you're speaking within your professional and personal life. But in particular, we are looking more and more, especially with the programming we have over the next couple of days, but with our work in the future here at NaRCAD, how can we help you as detailers find ways to model inclusive and responsive language for clinicians so that they can approach their patients in a way that is trustworthy, that isn't just, as Carla had said, you know, I'm trustworthy on the face, or I'm doing this thing that should build trust, right? But actually being accountable, being transparent. And Ryan says here in the chat box, when doing gender expansive academic detailing, we spend a lot of that time focusing on language. And Ryan will be presenting over the course of our next 2 days as well. I realized that 60 minutes is nowhere near enough to even start getting our feet wet in some of this. But I absolutely just want to say thank you so much for getting us thinking, for making a space and joining us to talk about what it really means to lead in academic detailing. You both come from just such rich backgrounds of expertise and lived experience. I could ask you a million more questions, but we only have 60 seconds left. So with that 60 seconds, I want to say thank you so much to Sarah and Carla, to know that we will be continuing to invite you as leaders in our field to speak to our community, to share ways that you think and know we should be moving forward, to tell us when you're stumped and you can help us help you. Much of this, again, is continuing to be committed to saying when we don't know, standing up for our collective humanity, and remembering those patients that are at the tail end of every detailing session that we carry out. So thank you very much, Sarah and Carla. We're so grateful to have you with us today. It is 1:15, so we will transition into a break. And so with that, I will say that you all can, is that correct, Anna? I'm having a hard time finding my box right now.
Yes, we are headed into a break for 15 minutes. And after break, we will go right into our workshop session. So you can scan the QR code when Bevan has the slides back up, or you can press the link in the chat that Anshul just dropped into the chat. So that you can find the Zoom link for the session that you want to attend. Your Zoom room will open right at 1:30. You'll be placed in a waiting room until then. You're more than welcome to stay in this main room if you want to chat with people in the chat box, or you can head on out, take a break, and then go right into your workshop Zoom room. So the links to the workshop Zooms are in the chat, and also you can scan the QR code on the screen to access that.
Thanks everyone for kicking off our first few sessions, and we'll see you in the workshops. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Please stay.
Thank you, Anshul. I hope you all enjoyed your workshop sessions. We are going to move into our next session with 2 special presentations. Both of our presenters are joining us from 2 different AAD programs in Chicago, Illinois. I am honored to be able to introduce our colleagues, Tina Anaziris and Maggie Kaufman. Tina has spent much of her career as a long-term care pharmacist, connecting with individuals, communicating their needs, and ensuring those needs were understood and addressed. She has worked with the Illinois Advanced team for just over a year, and she's been very involved with detailing, outreach, teamwork, and authoring campaign materials. Her clinical interests include women's health, older adults, and special populations. Maggie has been with the Community Outreach Intervention Projects team for almost 10 years in several roles, including overseeing both research studies and service provision for people who use drugs. Currently, she is the Harm Reduction Services Coordinator for the team. She frequently speaks to diverse groups in the health sciences field around harm reduction and how to integrate these principles and practices into clinical settings. It is my pleasure to turn it over to Tina to share more about the work at Illinois Advanced. Tina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here speaking today. Just want to check for a head nod. Everyone can hear me, yes?
Yes,
Perfect.
we can.
Okay, so I'm going to discuss a little bit today about how inclusivity can enhance communication throughout the layers of academic detailing, ultimately and hopefully improving patient outcomes. I have no disclosures or financial relationships. Here is a nice list of objectives. And as I mentioned, we're just going to kind of go through creating inclusive materials, fostering connections, and improving communication. And we're also going to talk a little bit about adapting to feedback to continuously improve our approach. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am from Chicago, where I'm currently working, born and raised. I grew up in a Greek family. I speak English, Greek, and Spanish. I attended UIC for both my undergraduate and pharmacy education, so I just can't seem to get away from them since I'm still here. And I really feel that academic detailing was a nice transition for me after being in compounding, where I was looking to serve populations who weren't represented in the medications that were available in long-term care, because you're often a few layers removed from the patient, but still wanting to really have that big impact on patient care. So really excited to be part of this world. And a little bit about Illinois Advance. Some of you have likely heard of our program and know that we are a fairly large one. This is really lovely because we have this internal network in addition to the network that we try and create outside of our program that's diverse. We have individuals with unique experiences in their careers in different areas of pharmacy. We all have different ways of thinking and sharing ideas. And so communication, curiosity, inclusivity are really central to our program's culture. And this helps us to adapt and improve continually. I will say, though, a lot of what we're going to talk about is applicable even if you're a smaller program. You just don't necessarily have to be approaching several groups with several different topics at a single time. So, okay, considering the culture of academic detailing and your program.
All right, Tina, we have a chat box question. So you can read the chat and I'll read the answers that are coming in the chat box for you.
Okay, great. So I'd like to ask, please, what words come to mind when you think of culture? And I'll joke a little and share, in the medical community, sometimes I get the answer about a Petri dish.
We have Maggie coming in with everything we do. Bevan says yogurt or yeast. Food. Adrian says good food. Style, roots, different perspectives, authenticity, people, community. So you got a mix of both, Tina, of food and culture and science, and also what we mean today. So we have identities, family, community, shared ideas, experiences, flavor, travel, people's lifestyle and identity, and deep. What do you think about those coming in, Tina?
Really great to see that variety, and you're all right in the space. You know, culture encompasses so many elements: language, ideas, belief, customs, more. It's shared among groups. It can be influenced by various factors, whether it's ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and so on. And in academic detailing, it's really crucial to understand and respect these cultural elements to communicate effectively and provide relevant information that's going to improve those patient outcomes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not stagnant, right? As we've alluded to so many times already in this conference. So moving on to mission and mindset. You know, we know this as detailers, thinking about these evidence-based insights for everyday practice and how we're bridging the gap, but kind of thinking about this through the layers. getting the information ultimately to patient care, understanding administrators' needs, healthcare professionals' practices, and ultimately the patient's needs. And so inclusivity and curiosity are really key to making academic detailing effective and impactful. Okay, incorporating inclusivity into the preparation of materials and resources.
All right, we have a Zoom poll now, everyone. We have not done a Zoom poll yet at this summit, but Anshul is going to launch it while Tina reads the question.
Okay, how do you prepare for academic detailing with cultural sensitivity and inclusivity in mind? And we have several options: participating in conferences, lectures, and education, researching and reviewing data, engaging with public health, or all of the above.
So most of our answers, I realize that only myself and my team can see the answers coming in, and we'll share the results in a moment. But most of the answers coming in right now, people are still answering, but they're saying all of the above. And it looks like everyone, I don't see any more answers coming in. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results with everyone. 91% are saying all of the above.
So that's really lovely. And this was a hard question to write because I think there are so many ways that we can try to prepare and think about inclusivity as we're preparing for academic detailing. And that brainstorming and research stage really is the first place where we want inclusivity in mind. There's many ways to gather information, and it speaks to building those resources and networks. At Illinois Advanced, we're really fortunate. We're part of the university, so a lot of times there's educational lectures, events, other opportunities to gain information about inclusivity and trending topics in healthcare. We also brainstorm with colleagues on our team, healthcare professionals at the university. We look into county and state health as another source of information. You know, we can pull data and heat maps and think about, for us, where in Illinois we'd like to reach out to, and then kind of zoom in on the information there. Relevant guiding influences for certain organizations, that could be their mission, legislation, HEDIS requirements, and then also engaging with areas where these connections and resources are already established, like public health or social workers, kind of the boots on the ground, so to speak. And we can also learn, of course, from our AD participants. It's not always about growing your network, sometimes about investing in the connections that you have. So from past collaborations, from surveys, really wanting to use that feedback. And so this helps us put together materials that are focused with a clear message, whether it's for marketing, for the AD visit, or for our library of resources. And this is an ongoing process. Being able to adapt and adjust is a big part of it. And, you know, we really like to think of our documents as living, breathing items. So learning from connections, really just wanting to understand the connections that you have are valuable resources. Asking questions and understanding needs at various levels can help us tailor our information and resources effectively. This is going to vary depending on the community, however small or large it is you're looking to help with patient outcomes. And so we want to enhance communication, we want to foster relationships and ask about the patient care, because this puts us in a better position, not just to communicate challenges for the healthcare professionals, but also for the patients that we're ultimately trying to help. Okay. And then I have a few examples here of some of the feedback that we've gotten from our connections. So asking these kinds of open-ended questions, we've been able to enhance clinical information. For example, when we do our STI brochure, a large topic right now is congenital syphilis. So we have a strong resource document now to help address FAQs on that. Community resources. We actually had one of our AD participants let us know that their nonprofit healthcare system was on a map for naloxone access because they were a site where there was free availability. And so that's probably the resource when I'm doing opioid education and pain management that I share most frequently. It's really lovely. You can see right where you are and where to go, and that addresses a lot of concerns. We also share information about locations with access to treatment, mobile treatment centers, transportation, affordable access to care. A lot of this has come to us from our learners. And then patient-facing materials. One of the most commonly requested was for validated home blood pressure devices for accuracy, and how that then affects prescribing. So that's something we made sure to include when we were putting together our information on hypertension. We've received feedback about habits and work practices being more efficient. We do work with an initiative, I believe the name is changing now, but they were called Project Open, where a prescriber shared that he does a group walk with his patients once a week, and that has caught on. We like to share successes. And asking how healthcare professionals are inclusive and what their successes are strengthens your program's knowledge. It's really rewarding when the practice change is applied because a connection was made and it felt like a fit for the healthcare professional to improve the outcomes they're striving to support for their patient, instead of kind of a chore to add to this big list of things that they're trying to fit in during a visit. So getting that information back really helps us change our lens and share what's worked for others as well.
All right, we have another Zoom poll, so Ancha will launch this, and Tina, go ahead and read our question.
Okay, what are some key considerations when creating materials with inclusivity in mind? Tailoring messages, using inclusive language, using inclusive visuals, and considering cultural contexts.
So far, we have 100% saying all of the above, and answers are still coming in, and we are still at 100% for all of the above. So I will end the poll, share the results, but there it is, all the above, Tina.
Absolutely. So that moves us very nicely into our written materials. Thinking about tailoring messages, which is not really a new idea here in AD. Inclusive language, are there resources available to you that talk about this, using that person first language, using factual language? A1C was this number versus A1C was good or bad, for example. Positive representations, someone worked through their journey and utilized the resources available to now reach a blood pressure goal, versus this individual came from a start where they did not have the resources available and they really struggled to get there. And transparently communicating goals and expectations. Kind of living in this factual world can sometimes be very helpful. Inclusive visuals, you wouldn't want to have a picture of the Chicago skyline if you were working with individuals in a rural area, perhaps. Cultural context, we talked a little bit about this already when we asked what culture is. What is the meaning of a word in a cultural context? What is the origin of the expressions being used, and how can that be taken perhaps one way or another? And this just helps with clarity in our communication. There are different inclusive writing resources available that you could look into. Sometimes your program, or if you have an affiliated university, they'll have things like an inclusivity toolkit. I know that NaRCAD has one as well. Or there's checklists like the Upstate Bias checklist, which help. And then the section that I always find very interesting in the written material that we have is our resources section. I find that I come back to it throughout the conversation, depending on what information I'm receiving while I'm detailing. And I feel like that's really the part that helps me think about how I can help be most impactful, how I can help with the everyday. So sometimes it's not in the necessarily clinical information and descriptions, but in where can I go should this situation arise. Okay. And then we have how inclusivity opens the door for new connections and opportunities. And we talk a little bit about marketing here. It's a very sparse slide because it's an invitation to answer the question, how can we help you? And it's really about listening. We're really fortunate to have a service and not a product, and so we can be constantly adaptable. And when your inclusivity is evident in this background research we were talking about, the communication and the materials, it's pretty recognizable. And something really interesting happens is that the AD program's desire to gain understanding and be inclusive, even though it's a journey and you may not be feeling that the program is showing it as strongly as you would like, it gets recognized, and individuals and organizations see this and they come to you and with how you can help them. They may be working on a project that they feel we are a fit for that we wouldn't have even thought about. They consider the program receptive, have enough information to see that you can support their initiatives, and so this new information is coming to you. So similarly, now there's a clear direction about how to apply updates and what topic areas and resources are being requested most. So you've invited individuals into your program by showing that you care, and you've made new connections that can help educate you on inclusivity. I want to share just real briefly a little bit about how we reach out to make connections with the messaging on our website, emails, and written materials. We share a list of topics. It's not necessarily exhaustive, but we just give a light amount of background so that that's available to see if it's a match. We don't focus on having our audience be an expert on academic detailing. Instead, we talk about how it can be incorporated to meet certain needs, discussing like determining clinical update needs, working with the interdisciplinary team, empowering patients, supporting practice initiatives, that kind of thing. And when we have a meeting, we give these suggestions and examples of similar things that we've done in the past to help kind of bridge that gap of, well, okay, AD sounds really great in theory, but how does it ultimately help me and how can I get there? And we do discuss how it's a relationship and not just a quick education. So kind of tuning those resources that we spend all this time asking about and learning about and compiling. Okay, so I want to share a few examples again of projects that we've had the privilege to work on and how these were identified or brought to our attention. So we learned from a conference we attended at the university that there is a need for primary care to be addressed in specialized care locations, for example, in oncology. This wasn't really something we had thought about. Sometimes when we were sharing about our program, we avoided specialists, would only reach out to primary care. But we learned that a lot of the patient populations, if they're in a certain situation, may only be going to the specialist. So that is now a place where we're sharing our information. In reaching out to state organizations about pain management and substance abuse materials, we discuss with them our program and how it focuses on destigmatizing opioids, access to naloxone, and how some of our pharmacists participate in a mobile unit that goes out to the community and dispenses buprenorphine. And so they really connected with our mission surrounding this patient-centered care and destigmatization. And they incorporated our academic detailing into their opioid disruption program, which prevents a gap in therapy for individuals when their previous prescriber is no longer available to continue care. So that was a really fun and unique way to impact the community. Similarly, we had a county reach back to us, county health department, talking about how there was a particular need and a particular push with their resources for asthma and diabetes care. So we were able to share messaging on that. In Illinois, women's and maternal health is a big focus. And so we've reached out within the university to make a connection for how we can start developing materials on that. And we also have a partnership with Maytech, and so we're constantly sharing resources about HIV, PrEP and PEP, and access to care. So a lot of real world ways that are rewarding that have come to us from being open and having this kind of communication. And then before I make it sound like we're overly proud here, I have Socrates here. The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. Again, emphasizing that this is really an evolving process and we really want to be open to new information so that we can constantly be aware of how we can improve our inclusivity. Okay. How inclusivity enhances communication throughout the layers of academic detailing.
All right, we have our final Zoom poll. If you'd like to read the question, Tina.
Sure. How can you help ensure inclusivity during AD visits?
All right, we have answers coming in and it's 100%. Oh, it's 96% all of the above. And we have one person saying active listening. And it looks like we're coming in with all of the above on top at 97%.
That's great. And so I'd really like to mention that, I mentioned earlier, we talk about the multiple layers, but kind of addressing with this individual, this is your opportunity to ask a lot of questions. How would the individual like to be referred to? What does their approach to care look like? What do cultural dynamics look like in their setting? What feedback have they received from patients? And what opportunities do they have to the community, to connect with the community that they serve? And so experience can help guide certain inclusive speaking points that are going to transcend most topics. And a lot of them are going to focus on strengthening communication and relationships between providers and patients. But we really want to take the opportunity to ask what those situations look like, the challenges and successes. We don't want to make assumptions, but invite the healthcare professional to discuss these areas in hopes that we can lead to more specific information about how we can support them. Okay. So inclusivity and practice change, I just have an example here. So let's say there's a provider that's prescribing those GLP-1 receptor agonists because it may be added for cardiac benefits regardless of A1C. It's not because of any fault of the patient. The benefits likely outweigh risks and adverse effects can be managed. However, the individual patient, if they are not filling it and the prescriber asks, they may find out, well, I thought my sugars looked okay. This wasn't covered. I felt bad about needing to take an injection. It's really just about getting to the heart of it. It's not necessarily that it's not being prescribed. So having that understanding through those layers really can impact what's needed from us. Okay, adapting to feedback. So we really want to maintain these relationships and gather feedback. We've talked about inclusivity being an invitation. Staying in touch is a great way to keep that conversation open. It allows individuals and organizations to reach back with new opportunities, helps maintain a comfort level with asking questions, and it allows us to reach out with surveys or ask for feedback, utilizing these connections in background research or for new topics or when we update our topics. And we ask about the applicability of key message, utility of the written material, and if practice changes occurred. There are a few other tools we use to measure impact as well. Sometimes we do testimonials, others are quantitative, like number of visits. So it's really possible to put these impactful metrics into a particular project and monitor the before and after. So if the project is part of a grant or part of Medicaid, it might be possible to measure if there is more or less prescribing of a particular medication associated with an ICD-10, if ER visits go down for certain ICD-10. And this is really great information to obtain and share about the value of the program. Okay. And then I want to conclude our discussion with some examples of program changes we've made based on feedback. We added a new topic this year, buprenorphine and OUD, based on many requests from our active learners. We also felt this was really important based on feedback from our team and experiences from our team members who participate in that mobile unit I mentioned, which dispenses buprenorphine to the community. As we were in the process of authoring the written information, we connected with an organization interested in utilizing our pain management and substance use disorder materials. And they shared particular questions about microdosing, and that was also a common ask among our learners, so we included that. Another one of our collaborations, which I mentioned earlier, Project Open, the lens for that really shifted from just kind of how we can impact and support opioid care in a more rural setting to how can we help bring these communities together to share their resources. So that was some of what was brought back to us after we first started on that journey. Our bifold on cardiorenal benefits of new medication classes in diabetes. It started off being very informational, very study focused, and with feedback, we adapted that to be much more day-to-day impact, what practice changes you can make. And one of our latest, we worked with IPHCA to do our newest bifold on hypertension. And they shared with us that they're doing this grant talking about interdisciplinary team and patient empowerment. And so we were really able to find the right information, data, and resources to link out to help support that mission. So inclusivity is a really powerful way to ensure what you're providing is information that's going to be utilized. And from there, there's a lot of room to continue to adapt based on the feedback that you're receiving. So to quickly summarize, inclusivity should be an open invitation to the healthcare community to share their needs by applying your curiosity and listening through these various layers of AD. It helps the program grow, adapt, and ultimately impact patient outcomes. We have a few references here and our Illinois Advance information if you'd like to look at us, but I just want to thank you again for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Tina. We appreciate you and all the work that Illinois Advance does. If folks have questions, please add them into the chat. You'll also have a chance to ask Tina any questions that come up. Later in this session, we'll have another Q&A with Maggie as well, so you can ask them both questions.
I have a question for Tina. So you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation something that we at NaRCAD know very well, which is that the advanced team is rather large. If you were to help a very small group, say a group of 3 or 4 detailers, get started in this realm, what's the most important things you would encourage them to do? Like the first 3 things you would encourage them to think about when they're thinking about building materials and thinking about inclusion, but on a very limited budget and in a very, very first pass. Hey, this is my first time popping into that realm. And I see we have another message from Sarah we can pop into after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best things that you can do, and it's a free thing we can do, is just a big shift in our lens of how we're approaching this. A lot of us are very academic. We're looking to get the information right, correct, the evidence-based things. But there's so much of it that figuring out instead first, which community am I going to ultimately try and share this information to impact? What does the healthcare look like there? Who can I reach out to for these questions to frame before I even start what the need is, and then go off and do my research? Just helps create a different level of connection. And I think that curiosity and that openness, people like to talk about themselves. If you're really willing to listen and about their programs and about the things that impassion their life and why they want to help that community, I think really changes the way that we then select the topic we're going to do, put the information and resources in, and then come back and say, we heard you, we continued to kind of check in with you throughout after this market research. So, it may be one topic and the neighborhood that's a few blocks over, but it's still going to make a big difference. We don't need to change the whole state in one day.
I love that so much. And as a quick reflection, just to say, I think a lot of times, many of us, not me, because I don't have that kind of mind, go to the academics first, go to the research first, and really kind of, as you said, want to get it right. But it sounds like getting it right for you and for so many of us, we're starting to notice, is to ask the communities what they need first and really think about the construction of what we're building based on their need versus starting as sort of what does everyone need based on this topic. So I think that's a really lovely way to go. Thanks for answering. And Anna, over to you to pull some questions.
Yeah, thanks for asking that one. Sarah asks, how have you handled the race-based medication recommendations found in the guidelines when it comes to the management of hypertension?
That's a wonderful question. Hypertension has not changed very much in its approach, but it is complicated triaging out which medications to pick, even before we get into race, if they also have, for example, diabetes, if they also are a pregnant individual, what have you. But what we try to do is also pick individuals for which we had information. So we wrote a little bit about medication choices in Black individuals, and then also in the pregnant population, also in older adults right there in the brochure. And we did that in 2 ways. We had it so that we called out some of the recommended medications, but then we also talked a little bit about some of the considerations that you would want to have about how that medication is going to work, or whether it might need to be twice a day, kind of getting to those intricacies. Unfortunately, on paper, it's really hard to address everything. So I think a big part of what we do is also really emphasizing that we have that relationship and can continue the conversation off page, or would be willing to do that extra research, because as much as we would like to, I think it would end up being 100 pages to even try and go down that path.
Thanks, Tina. And we have one more question before we transition to the next presentation. Have any providers inquired on the use of buprenorphine for the treatment of pain? There's a lot of apprehension and stigma surrounding this topic.
I do believe we've had that question a few times. Our piece on buprenorphine talks about using it for OUD, but when we do our discussion on pain management in general, this is something that stuck out to me right away because of my background in long-term care. And we do pull out the difference between opioid use disorder and opioid dependence, just because the system with so much exposure over time and perhaps a continued need for pain management, we want to look into other options, and tapering to nothing is not always available. So this does come up. I do think that more than apprehension and stigma, it's almost a more surprising topic for the individuals who don't ask about it. I think kind of getting this message out is perhaps what's needed. So, and also, you know, we were talking about thinking of the communities before, it's also kind of living in the real world and not the ideal, right? So what would you recommend in the ideal world? And then what would you recommend with the resources they have available? I think also applies to this question.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. All right, Bevan, I see you unmuted. Did you have something else to add?
I did not. Nope, just
Okay.
here to back you up.
All right, we are going to transition now into our presentation from Maggie Kaufman about AD for harm reduction. I'm going to level set with some slides and definitions before I turn it over to Maggie. So what is harm reduction for substance use? Harm reduction is a practical approach that incorporates community-driven public health strategies to empower people who use drugs and their families and support people with the choice to live healthy, self-directed, and purpose-filled lives. There are multiple harm reduction approaches for substance use. Harm reduction can look like a lot of different things. This list does not include every approach to harm reduction, but highlights some of them. So we have needle exchange, vitamin C, naloxone administration education, nicotine cessation therapies, wound care kits, fentanyl strips, safer sex kits, navigation services, safer smoking kits, medication lockboxes, and I think they have one more, sterile water and saline. So we worked on a project over here at NaRCAD and created some key messages for harm reduction. And these key messages are patient-centered and highlight the use of community resources, which is really what harm reduction is about. They can be adapted to fit the needs of your own community or project, but we did just want to share them with you. So we have assess factors that may contribute to risk of opioid use disorder for patients who use opioids, identify opportunities to reduce risk of harm using a patient-centered approach, offer medications for opioid use disorder to patients identified as having OUD. And lastly, my favorite key message, connect patients with community harm reduction services and other services that meet their identified needs. So with that, it is my pleasure to now turn it over to Maggie, who is an expert in harm reduction, and will dive deeper into this topic and share some of her own key messages that their team used in their campaign. So Maggie, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for being inclusive and including our program today. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about our harm reduction academic detailing pilot project and how we incorporated the lived experience of people who use drugs into the development of our key messages. And I have no financial or conflict of interest to disclose. So again, just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the organization that I am a part of. We are at University of Illinois, Chicago, just like Tina is, just down the street from each other, I believe. And then we are going to talk about a little bit more about harm reduction itself, what it means, what it looks like, etc. And then we'll talk more about our pilot program here at UIC, and then incorporating lived experience, what we've learned, and kind of where we're going next with our program. Next.
All right, Maggie, we are going to start with a chat waterfall. So go ahead and read your question and I'll help you read the answers from the chat.
Sure. What is one word that comes to mind when you think of harm reduction?
Acceptance. Thanks, Adrian. Adrian also worked on this pilot project. Safety. Help, destigmatization, life-saving, kindness, support, caring, holistic, safety, opportunity, humanity, autonomy, necessary, realistic, safety, access, enabling, from Bevan, in quotes, support. These are all great, really positive for the most part. Security and choice and agency. Maggie, what do you think about those?
These are awesome. I think these are all elements, including the enabling. You know, that is an argument we get a lot of times around harm reduction, is that it just enables people to continue their risky use. And actually, we would argue that it does the opposite. There's a lot of data around the effectiveness of harm reduction strategies, including that those who access harm reduction are more likely to enter into substance use treatment, reduce their use, reduce the harms of the substances that they might be consuming, etc. So yes, and I love that somebody said moving away from the abstinence only mentality. That is a big part of harm reduction as well. Next. Oh, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about community outreach intervention projects, or COIP, because that's a lot shorter. We are a center in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois, Chicago. We've been around for 30 plus years. We were founded in the late 80s by Dr. Wayne Weibel at UIC, when he was awarded one of the first national AIDS demonstration research projects from NIDA. This was during the height of the HIV epidemic. And really, they were looking at ways to do prevention with people who inject drugs, as that was a population that really wasn't being reached at that time, due in large part to stigma and accessibility. We serve Chicago communities with the highest rates of overdoses, as well as infectious disease rates. So I know a lot of you are probably not familiar with Chicago, but in Chicago, our south and west side neighborhoods are the most impacted by overdose and overdose mortality. And UIC is kind of situated at the intersection of those two areas of the city. So we serve a lot of folks from those areas that are at higher risk. We have 4 storefront sites. So even though my office, our administrative offices are in the School of Public Health, our actual services are delivered in the community. And currently we're in 4 areas of the city. And then we also have mobile outreach. We do mobile harm reduction, but we also partner with UI Health to provide mobile buprenorphine distribution, et cetera. We also have things like a sobering tent. So we have a lot of services in the community because that's where the need is. We utilize what we call the Indigenous Leader Outreach Model. That is basically an early peer model. You know, when we first started doing this work, peer models were not really a thing, or were not nearly as emphasized as they are today. So we've been doing that for a long time. So most of our staff are people with lived experience of substance use, incarceration, sex work, et cetera. They have a lot in common with the folks that they're serving. They're very often from the neighborhoods that they're working within, so that we know that having folks that have that lived experience and commonalities allows for them to reach the populations that they're serving in a much more culturally sensitive way. And we also do research to improve the delivery of services and interventions with people who inject drugs, but also people who use drugs. We really started with syringe exchange, syringe services, and then outreach and harm reduction services followed. And then over the years, our service menu has really grown, mostly in response to community feedback and identified needs of the people that we serve. So we now have robust recovery supports, we have case management, we have medical care at several of our sites through UI Health, etc. Next slide. Okay, just a little bit more about this Indigenous leader model. I covered some of this, but again, we started this in the late 80s with hiring people from the target population. Again, the problem is that we knew that HIV was an increasing problem among people who use drugs, or in particular people who inject, but nobody really knew how to reach them to provide these prevention interventions. And so initially we just tried, hey, why don't we train some folks from the community, folks with lived experience, to provide these services and see if that increases the acceptability and accessibility. And it did. So this is something that we've continued to do. There's now a lot of evidence around peer-based interventions. And it's down to this shared experience. You know, you're more credible, you're more accepted by the community. You can be more empathetic in that you've had a similar experience, but you can also be a model for where somebody can go. If they want to be abstinent, if recovery looks like that to them, you know, they're now speaking with somebody that has achieved that for themselves. And so they can serve as a guide, but also as kind of a mentor in recovery. And then we're not only targeting individuals, but we're also targeting social networks to change group norms so that things like sharing injection materials become not favored within the group norms of that community, and that we replace that with a norm of using clean, sterile equipment and not sharing. And then our work has always been guided by epidemiology and ethnography. Dr. Weibel is an ethnographer, our current director is an ethnographer. So we have a long history of folks who have experience with doing field work and really discussing these topics in depth with the people that are most affected. Next slide. I think we saw a lot of this on a previous slide, but I just want to highlight, as I try to do, and anytime I talk about harm reduction, is that it's not new and we're all doing it. So I think we can all think of something we did today that is harm reduction, whether that's putting your seatbelt on, whether that's taking medication as it's prescribed, condoms, etc. I think the reason we don't associate harm reduction with substance use is because substance use is so stigmatized. We wouldn't be ashamed to say, I used my seatbelt today, but we might be ashamed to say, I went to the syringe exchange today to get clean equipment. And that's due to kind of larger social factors that all of this is embedded within. Next slide. I want to focus for a moment on some of these principles of harm reduction. So I'm not going to read them. You can read them. These are all pulled directly from the National Harm Reduction Coalition, which, if you're interested in learning about harm reduction, is a great place to start. They have a lot of resources that are accessible and free, most of them, a lot of trainings, etc. So while there is no one definition of harm reduction, because it is meant to be a responsive model, so what it looks like in practice is going to change based on where it's being practiced. So harm reduction in a rural setting is going to look different potentially than harm reduction in an urban setting, etc. But some of these tenets are really at the core of this approach. So accepting that people are going to use drugs. They always have, they always will. We can't just ignore this phenomenon. And that our goal is to increase the quality of individuals' lives, but also the health of communities, not necessarily abstinence from all substance use. And it really ensures that people who have lived and living experience are centered in conversations around harm reduction, and that this last point, you know, that there are structural factors that are dictating what people have access to, what they feel they can do, what social capital, what recovery capital they might have. And we need to remember that when we're talking about individual level behaviors. Next slide. And again, this is the rest of them, sorry. Calls for non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services to provide for people who use drugs. Historically, a lot of services for people who use drugs are very paternalistic, based on models where people don't have the wherewithal to kind of make decisions about their own lives and what's good for them. So obviously in a harm reduction approach, we're listening to people and what they want. And that this is complicated. It's complex. There's a lot of intersecting factors that are going on here. Again, it's not just individual behavior choices. And then the last one I always want to emphasize, this is that enabling piece, is that we are not attempting to minimize that there are real harms from using drugs. That's kind of the baseline, that there are harms, and how can we reduce them if a person in their own version of recovery is not ready to be abstinent or does not want to be abstinent. Next slide. Okay, and this is just moving into kind of what we've been doing here. So we were funded by NACCHO to do a harm reduction academic detailing pilot project. Our target population is internal medicine providers, residents, and fellows that practice at UI Health. We're an urban academic teaching hospital and clinic system, and we serve primarily lower income Black and Brown communities, which again are those who are at higher risk of opioid overdose, mortality, morbidity. And then we serve approximately 2 million people in the service area for UI Health. So we have an opportunity to reach a lot of people, excuse me. So what does our program entail? We're doing 3 academic detailing sessions to 15 UI Health internal medicine providers. As a note here, we are currently pivoting to include other providers, primarily family medicine providers, to just expand the pool of eligible folks for our detailing sessions. We're providing key messages around harm reduction and a robust action kit and resource guides. So we have both provider and patient-facing materials, an extensive locally tailored resource guide. We're giving everybody nasal naloxone, but also how they can sign up for a program that will allow them to get that for free, ongoing, etc. Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about living experience and lived experience, but what is that? So I have this definition here, and it seems like one of those things that is taken for granted, but I think it is important to really understand what that means. And it's that somebody not only has the experience, but that experience has shaped how they live in the world. And that they are directly impacted by these issues. So they have the best solutions potentially for how to solve these issues. And this quote down here, "Nothing about us without us," is very frequently used in the harm reduction community, which essentially is calling for, nobody should just be telling us what to do. What is the best practices for us? They should be asking us what we want, what we need, and how we want it delivered. And that is kind of the approach that we took for developing our key messages. And it centers the expertise and deep knowledge base of those affected by the issue or topic being discussed. So in this case, substance use. And it also helps to address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And be mindful, though, that individual experiences vary, but all experiences are valid. So we also don't want to tokenize folks with lived or living experience and, talk to one person and assume that we know everything about a person who uses drugs. We know that person's experience, and that experience is valid. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is this important? I think we're unique we're new to academic detailing. We are a harm reduction organization. This is something we've kind of added. I think it really has helped us that we have this baseline infrastructure of incorporating lived experience into our programming for a very long time. And what we've learned both from this experience, but also just past experiences, is getting patient feedback or potential patient feedback really can help address gaps in existing practice. It allows you to better tailor your messaging. I know Tina talked a lot about that, making sure that our messages are responsive to people's needs. It allows for iterative refinement of key messages over time. I know we've heard a couple times these things are not static. It's important for fast moving fields. I mean, I think all academic detailing topics are probably fast moving, but harm reduction in particular is having a moment right now. So a lot more people are hearing the term, et cetera, but maybe don't know about it or know really what it is. So getting this feedback during that process is really important. And it helps to learn about barriers and facilitators that you might not otherwise know about. We've had that happen many times where we thought there might be a barrier to service access, linkage to care, et cetera. And when we talked to folks, we found out it was completely different. So if you don't talk to people, you don't know that. And you're left assuming based on your own experience what might be a barrier. And then gives insight into new provider populations to target for AD sessions. Next slide. Again, like, why do we want to do this? And how do we do this? How do we seek out lived and living experience? Utilize existing patient populations. You have folks that the providers are already working with. Or if you know the target patient population, going and talking to people, identify organizations that may serve those folks. And seeing if you can have a meeting or, you know, a focus group or some sort of conversation with folks about what their needs are, creating partnerships with organizations and academic institutions, and then treating those with lived experience as experts that they are. And this is really important to me, compensating people fairly for their time. Historically, people with lived experience have not been compensated fairly, often being asked to give their time freely. And so we're really trying as a community to emphasize that this knowledge is just as important as academic knowledge and should be compensated in the same way. And then you can bridge gaps between patients and providers through this multi-directional feedback and learning. So our providers are learning from our clients who are people with lived experience, but we're also learning from our providers and are able to bring that back to the people that we serve to help each side kind of understand each other a little bit better. Next slide. Yes, I like that. Dave. Here are our key messages. So we made them fairly universal. So when we were going to pivot to kind of incorporate other populations, we were asked kind of, are our key messages still going to be appropriate? And one of the reasons we thought they would be is because they're very broad. So key message number one is use person-centered, non-stigmatizing language to discuss substance use with your patients. Most of us use stigmatizing language. I still catch myself using stigmatizing language sometimes because it's so ingrained within our society and our culture at this moment. So I think being aware of it and being aware of how language matters is really important. Inviting patients to share their own experiences with past harm reduction or substance use treatment options, what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them. Providing OEND, so anybody who's coming in that has a prescription for opioids, has been there for overdose response, has a history of substance use, making sure that they know how to use naloxone and have access to it, and also their support people. As we know, you can't naloxone yourself. So it's really important to involve those networks in those conversations as well. And then linking patients to community-based supportive and culturally relevant services and harm reduction organizations. And then this is just a little bit more about how we utilized the folks that we work with and their lived experience into the development and refinement of our key messages. So initially, we just developed messaging based on our experience as harm reductionists, and also the providers we work with and past work with people who use drugs. We also did a review of best practice literature. And then what we did was take that to our folks who are either on the provider side. We work with a lot of harm reduction champions within UI Health. So we had them review our messages to see if they resonate with them as providers. And then we've done 2 focus groups with COIP participants who are people with living experience. 1 session before we started doing the AD sessions, and then 1 session after 5 had been completed, again, to get feedback around the messages themselves, but also just trying to get a better sense of how provider-patient interactions have gone in the past, what they would want their provider to know about harm reduction, et cetera. And then we incorporated all that feedback into our key messages that we've been using. And then at the end of July, when our program ends, we will do another round based on all of our experience to do a final refinement of our key messages. Next slide. And how are we evaluating this? So because this is a pilot, we do not have like a robust evaluation plan, but we are doing pre and post session evaluation surveys after the first and third sessions. And this is both qualitative and quantitative. We use the part of the toolkit that NaRCAD has available for evaluating sessions. So that was really helpful and just adapted it to our program. And we also include a solicitation of feedback and topics that the detailee wants to know about. And this has helped even within the sessions themselves, because people have a very broad range of understanding of harm reduction. So some folks are very familiar, others are not. And so we want to get the most out of these sessions. So we ask them about specific topics and then we can incorporate those into future visits to make sure that they're getting the maximum benefit out of those sessions. And these are just some of the comments we've had after initial visits. So we've been very excited that this has been well received. People are finding it valuable. And we're looking forward to kind of seeing what the whole cohort has to say about the sessions themselves. Okay, and what are we doing next? So as I just said, we're going to further refine our key messages based on final survey results. Focus groups, just informal feedback from participants, as well as our folks at COIP. I plan to present findings and feedback to our folks that we serve through a variety of formats, again, to be inclusive. We forget a lot as folks in academic institutions and elsewhere that a lot of our clients have literacy issues, things like that. And in terms of being inclusive, trying to use multiple modalities to express results and information is always something we're striving to do to make it more inclusive. And then we're going to keep networking and collaborating, hopefully with other AD programs to incorporate harm reduction if possible into other programming. Ongoing updates to our resources and action kits. Again, this is a fast moving field, so these things don't stay static for very long. And of course, applying for future funding or looking for opportunities to continue this harm reduction academic detailing program beyond this summer. And I would be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you to NACCHO for funding our program. The HRAD team, Adrian is here representing that, have been amazingly supportive, great champions. We loved working with them. It's been such a positive experience. Our participants, can't thank them enough for their invaluable feedback, insights, and expertise. Our medical provider partners, and then NaRCAD for ongoing training support. Again, we've been really lucky to have all of you as collaborators in providing this program, because we've learned a lot in the last several months, and a lot of that is thanks to NaRCAD. And
Thank you, Maggie. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So glad to learn from you.
All right. Any questions folks have, please add them to the chat. I see Bevan, you started off with a question. Would you like to verbalize the question?
Sure. I was just wondering what was the most surprising part of rolling this project out? You've been working in this field in general for a while. Was there something in particular that really stands out in your mind as like, oh, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, or just, I don't know, something that just really is a nugget?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've been surprised about is just the overall receptivity to this topic. Because we hear so much about how there's negative depictions of people who use drugs, et cetera. And we hear a lot of negative patient provider experiences from our clients. So it was really surprising that both the people who access our services as well as providers are really interested in this and really excited about their provider maybe learning more about this and how they can incorporate it. And I think that's been one of the most surprising parts. And then kind of some of the feedback we got during the focus groups was really interesting. Again, getting at that, they identified barriers and things like that we did not anticipate, and that really did help to inform kind of the sessions going forward and making sure their voices were included in that education.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Like some stuff you weren't expecting from the focus groups? We're fresh off of Adrian and I just ran one on like a workshop on how to run a focus group. So I'm sure people are just kind of like, ooh, what's the goals that you can find in a session like that?
Yeah, just one example that came out of our first focus group was one participant mentioned this, and then everybody kind of jumped on because they had had a similar experience, and really was one of the major barriers to them accessing care was bad experiences with phlebotomy. As most of you may know, people who inject drugs end up with being very hard to get blood draws on, and they get poked a bunch of times. And you would assume that people who inject drugs and are used to using needles would not have issues with being poked, but a lot of them are very either squeamish or have had bad experiences where the person basically blamed them for them not being able to do their job. And that was something, again, like all 5 participants in that group said, I've not gone back somewhere because when I went to get a blood draw, it was horrible and traumatic. So again, like we've heard that, but it was like they identified this as a major barrier that again we wouldn't have known was so important without asking people.
And that also shows the importance of, you know, if you had just a one-to-one interview with everyone, you might not have had people be like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. So that's also a nice thing about focus grouping, that can pull patients together in a community space. And Ryan says, thank you so much for bringing that up. Other questions for Maggie, and anything you wanted to add to that, Maggie?
No, yeah, I mean, I just think it's, like you said, the group aspect of a focus group obviously is beneficial because also it makes the participants feel more like they're not alone in some of their experiences, etc. And it definitely provides a way for people to kind of bounce ideas off of each other, etc., especially those who might not be big talkers. When they hear somebody else talking about something that resonates with them, they're more likely to kind of chime in and add to the conversation.
Love that. Back to you, Anna.
All right, Maggie, we have a question from Mike. It's great that you had providers open to the message. I sometimes worry that we get access to providers who are more inclined to agree with our messages and have trouble accessing others. How are you thinking about expanding the base of providers, AD practices, to get to those who might be more resistant? Excuse me.
Yeah, so this is something that we thought about from the beginning, because the genesis of the population that we're working with was come up with in collaboration with our UI health providers, particularly our MOUD providers, but also those who are providing primary care, wound care, et cetera, at our sites. And then we very intentionally did not ask those providers to recommend providers because those are our harm reduction champions. We know that the folks that they're going to know are probably on board with this in a way that others may not be. I think if we were doing this ongoing and we were doing more cold calls and not having people kind of self-select, I think we would definitely encounter more people that had resistance to this or were just reflective of kind of the larger social messages that we're all getting, and may just be buying into those more than some of us who do this work and are actively, working against those.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks, Maggie. And as Bevan put in the chat, this is the last chance. If you have any questions for Tina or Maggie, please pop them into the chat. And if you think of a question later on, you can still add it to the chat and we will get to it, I promise.
All right. Thank you so much. Couldn't say it better myself. And Charisse, thank you, Maggie, for this beautiful talk. And thank you, Tina, as well. And I'll turn it to you to wrap this session on up, and then we'll do our last session of the day.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. We love the representation from Chicago. Thank you, Maggie, Tina. We appreciate all your expertise and all that you've shared with our AD community. So with that, we are over to Bevan to introduce our final speaker of the day.
All right. Thank you again, ladies. Really, really enjoyed learning from you both. Learned a lot of new things. All right, so up next we have a new session that we've added this year called the Think Tank, and we're calling it that as our way of getting out of the hot seat of having to have any answers. But what we want to do is get folks thinking, and definitely in a way that we know hurt our brains here at NaRCAD, trying to start talking about looking at data through an equity lens. So many questions, so many challenges, and here to explore some of them. We have our fearless leader, Dr. Mike Fisher. He is the chief of the section of general internal medicine here at Boston Medical Center, the hospital under which we are housed. And I am delighted to turn the mic over to Mike to wrap up day one. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
It is excellent. I couldn't be more cheerful after these last few hours. So really appreciate the chance to talk with all of you and share some ideas. And what's really what's really exciting and fun is that there'll be several themes, and I'll try to, as we come to them in the slides, themes that we've all been thinking about as a team in putting this together that came up organically in the conversations and presentations that we've been having already over the course of the summit. And it's really terrific to see how much the focus on equity and inclusivity comes through all of the elements that we're talking about. So what I want to do over the time we have together now, and I'll aim for, I think we're starting a couple of minutes, I'll aim for about 20, 25 minutes to leave us at least, 5 or 10 minutes at the end, if not a little more, for your questions and insights. I know we're at the end of the day, but I've really been enjoying watching the chat and seeing what you all bring to the table and your thoughts. So, please pop things in as we go. I won't be looking at the chat, but of course the team can interrupt with questions as we go if needed. So let me start to orient you to how we're thinking about this. Academic detailing as a field really is deeply rooted in data. If you think about the foundational principles of it, the way we train in it, we really use data at every step of the process. We review the literature to, when we're getting ready to start an academic detailing campaign, to figure out where is the evidence and what's the best evidence-based care for the condition that we're going to focus on. We then use data maybe from our region, from our health system. It might be a state, a city, a hospital network, to think about what are the care gaps that we're going to try to address. What are the targets for the intervention? Maybe the patient populations, the clinicians. And then as an intervention is going on, our academic detailing work is going on, or afterwards, we'll be collecting data and we'll be assessing and evaluating it to figure out how we're doing. And so data is part of the entire process of what we do. However, the thing that we need to consider is that data really, when you come down to it, is a tool. Our collection of data, our review of data, our assessment of data is a tool that we use, but as a tool, it reflects what's going on in our healthcare system and in our broader society, whereas many of the speakers and commenters have brought out really, really strikingly today, there are a range of inequities that patients and communities face, and the data will reflect that. And so when we think about our data tools, when we think about how to look at data, that equity lens is critical to making sure that we are planning, implementing, and assessing our AD interventions with a true focus on equity. Before I start getting into some practical examples, let me talk a little about some of the principles of equitable data practice. There's some great stuff written about this. For the sake of time, I'm not going to delve into it too deeply here. There's a number of publications. We're using as our anchor this recent overview from the Urban Institute. I think the link to it should be going in the chat right now. And I think it's a great overview. And if you're interested, there are references and other things in it where you can dive much deeper if you'd like to. One of the principles that I'll read out here, they say everyone who works with data should consider how their actions and resulting products affect people and communities. It's a broad statement, but it's a really useful, as I said, anchor to think about. Part of the way the Urban Institute sort of frames that is by thinking about the Belmont Report principles. The Belmont Report is a much longer document we'll also link to in the chat that has much more to do with the principles of research involving human subjects and ethical conduct of research. But there are 3 principles that we'll call out that are worth thinking about in how we use data. Those 3 are beneficence. So the idea that you should be maximizing benefits and avoiding causing harm as much as possible. This is in research, but to apply that when you're using data. Respect for persons, a real responsibility to uphold people's power to make decisions that are in their best interest and to protect people who do not have that power. It's, as I said, it's been remarkable to see the through lines. The reference I was making here, you now had wonderfully illustrated just about 20 minutes ago in the slide that showed nothing about us without us. You know, here at BMC, we've mentioned we're the safety net hospital. We do a lot of work engaging with our communities. And that's one of the key phrases that comes up when we talk with our communities that we serve as a clinical service provider, as a hospital, about how we use data, how we interpret it when trying to partner with our community members. And so I think that idea of respect for persons, what Maggie introduced about nothing about us without us, is key. And then justice, a commitment to a fair distribution of burdens and benefits among people. Who's facing the burdens of data collection? Who's really benefiting from it? And have you thought about how that will play out in both the immediate term and the longer term? For individuals and for the communities that ideally we're all serving. So thinking a little bit more about how we use data, it is important to recognize, I sort of hinted at those limitations before, the ways that data can perpetuate inequities. I want to be clear that although I'm going to raise problems, we're also going to anchor that in thinking about approaches. You know, this isn't meant to suggest a sort of nihilism or despair about data, that because we live in a system that has inequities that may be reflected in data, there's nothing we can do about it. We can always try to find a way to make things better. We won't necessarily have a perfect solution to the problems and the challenges that we see in data, but the more that we can be aware of the nuances that exist. And as I said, I'll be giving a few examples, but there are many more, and I'm sure some of you will have encountered different ones in your work. The more we can be aware of those nuances, the more we can try to be part of the efforts to improve things, that by recognizing these limitations, we can say, what's a new approach? How might we use data in any given healthcare activity, but for us, of course, thinking about AD, in order to do better on those principles we talked about on the prior slide, in beneficence, in respect for persons, in justice, in a way that makes sure that our work is really meeting the goals we all would like to set out for ourselves. So let's start to think through some specific examples. You know, one big one is lack of representativeness in the literature. So I talked about that the first step in our AD initiatives is going to the literature to find what's the evidence-based approach. And I want to sort of pause for a second from the planned slides, and I have to say, because we had finished these slides before this morning, but here in our general internal medicine group here at the hospital, we had our grand rounds this morning. And it was a terrific presentation by a group of educators who've been developing a curriculum for medical trainees focused on having an anti-racist approach when learning clinical medicine. And one big section of their presentation was about what we're talking about on this slide, how to teach trainees to use the literature while recognizing some of the problems we're talking about here. That historically studies focused on having a really homogeneous population of patients. There were multiple reasons for that. There was, first of all, there was simply that for the most part, white male patients were the ones who had access to medical care, but also a belief that you would get a in some way more accurate, quote unquote, scientific estimate of the effect of the treatment or what have you that you were studying if you had a very homogeneous population. And of course, this meant a lack of inclusion of women, of non-white patients, of the elderly, of many other groups who were not part of the dominant group. That really affected what was represented in the literature. And I want to also mention it was a great question that would ask, I think it was, or no, it was asked to Sarah or by Sarah, or either way, earlier today, about the guidelines and the use of race in the hypertension guidelines. That's an area that we've recognized reflects the way that that the literature was constructed before. And increasingly, and this was another significant part of the talk this morning about how we should be teaching trainees, was the idea that there are many guidelines that include race, even though we increasingly recognize that race is not actually a biological entity, it's a social construct, and that it doesn't make sense to be stratifying who should get a treatment, who might be eligible for a medicine or even a transplant in some cases based on that. There was one of the citations from this morning that if we could potentially drop in the chat was from a great review in the New England Journal of Medicine a few years ago that called out a number, I think about a dozen different clinical guidelines that use these race-based criteria that could have inequitable outcomes. This is important for us as academic detailers, I'd say, because the talk today that we had was really about how we can do this for our trainees. And that's really important. And we are based in a teaching hospital. It's great to teach our trainees what to do. All of us as academic detailers, the crux of our field comes from the idea that once clinicians are out in practice, how do they keep getting new information? How do they update and learn ways that they can adapt and be more effective, do better by their patients in the communities they serve? And this is one of those ways where by conveying this information to clinicians, we can meet that challenge. So what kind of approaches can we use? As I said, what are the practical steps? One is simply to assess the inclusiveness of the evidence base that exists. To look, we wouldn't necessarily throw away every older study, but we do need to take a careful look, not just at the results, what was the difference in outcomes for the treated versus untreated patients, but when we're looking at a study at what's usually seen in the table 1 of a study, what did the population look like? Were they representative of the populations that in your community, of the people served by your clinicians? Also considering how race and other factors might affect patterns of care in ways that could be relevant for how you will apply the literature to your academic detailing interventions. Most importantly, including those limitations of the literature in your communication. If you're going to talk to clinicians in a given community, that it's okay to say, this is the evidence we have. Here's some of the studies, which were maybe in a population that's not as representative of the patients and communities you serve. Here's what we have that's a little more representative. We know it's still a work in progress, but we're this is the best information we have to really normalize these discussions, because we are focused on making things better. And this is a way we can engage without setting an unrealistic standard, because making these changes in biomedical research is going to take time, but we want to figure out how we can be more inclusive, be more effective in the here and now. So that's one big domain. The other bit, a second one we talked about is how do we collect data? Remember, we talked about, that a second step is how we collect and analyze data. We need to realize that each decision about what data elements we collect and how we collect them includes assumptions about the data sources we are using and about the populations captured, or the populations from whom those data are drawn. And those assumptions may include many of our implicit biases. So as an example, data collection, data management can be expensive. And so available data may reflect inequities in systems or communities. You know, if there are voluntary reporting systems from communities or community-based organizations, then a community that has more resources across any of a range of domains may be more likely to have more complete data, or the patients included in that part of the community may be better represented in the data. And that may introduce bias into how you look, how you, what you see and what appears to be the case. Maybe you will miss an important gap, an important opportunity to help a population that's not getting access to care. And so recognizing this as you think about data collection, thinking carefully about what the data sources are is important. So the approach is the pragmatic way that we go at this is to ask these critical questions. Ask who is included in the data that you're collecting. Who do you anticipate will be reflected in that data? And just as importantly, who might not be reflected in that data? You know, if there are communities where data is not collected, or if there are outcomes that might not be collected, identify that up front, ask questions about it. And again, you know, bring that to your leadership. Use that when you are planning before an intervention starts for how you'll evaluate it. Again, as I've been saying, you won't necessarily be able to perfect solutions to these problems right away, but the more they are on our radar, the more we are openly grappling with them, the better position we'll be to take positive action. So then the third domain to think about is potential misinterpretation of data. You know, when you've got the data and you're evaluating it. And again, this is, you know, I'm assuming here that people are coming to this with good intent. So this is, you know, this is not a problem of people who are manipulating data for, you know, for sort of, you know, to make, you know, for problematic reasons. That is a problem when that happens, and it's something worth talking about. But I'm thinking about how we all approach this, you know, that all of us in this community are thinking about how we can use academic detailing to address the problems that motivate our work. But even well-intentioned systems and potentially, you know, in principle, well-designed analyses can unintentionally yield results that contribute to disparities. You know, I saw a really striking presentation of this that has really stuck with me. Must have been about a year ago in a discussion about sort of broader healthcare resource allocation. So this was a well-intentioned, it was not directly an academic detailing, but a really, I thought, evocative example. A really well-intentioned initiative to say that, you know, practices, hospital networks, and systems that take care of patients who are sicker, who face a higher burden of illness, who maybe have been disadvantaged, you know, they have to do more work. And we should find a way to provide higher payment levels so that those who are taking care of the sickest patients get more resources. And that seemed to make sense. And a system was set up to look at healthcare utilization data and say, okay, if you're seeing those sicker patients, then next year the insurers and the city or the state should give you a little more support. What happened when that was implemented is that patients in communities who had less access to care for any of a variety of structural reasons related to income, access to transportation, the kinds of job flexibilities that were available, actually use less care and therefore appear less sick. And then the clinicians who took care of them, the insurance that those patients had, actually had fewer resources in the following cycle, the opposite of what was intended. And so that was a striking example to me that when you are thinking about how to analyze the data that you collect, you want to think very carefully about what is the model of what's happening that you're capturing the data, how are you analyzing it, and are there any potential unintended consequences? So this is a key place where we need to say, are our analyses helping to support the equity and inclusiveness goals that we're going for? Thinking about how is equity reflected in the data. Maybe sometimes the specifics of who isn't getting evidence-based care and why they might not be getting evidence-based care are just as important as the raw data themselves. These are three, pretty broad sort of domains of example. As I said, many of you, and we should have some time for questions, or discussion at the end. If you've seen other examples, there are many dimensions where these things occur. And my hope in this session is to give us a framework to start thinking about this and to carry on the discussion. Let me try to bring it together before I get to my concluding section by sort of walking us step by step through an example that a lot of our colleagues, our partners in academic detailing have been detailing on, that I think has good illustrations that may help make it concrete for you across each of these domains. So we've seen a lot of AD interventions in recent years and getting to be decades around the use of PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, to help protect patients, reduce the rates at which patients contract HIV infection. So thinking about that step one, the literature. The early literature on PrEP was not necessarily representative of many of the populations. It was originally, many of the early studies predominantly included white men who had sex with men, generally from high income areas, which is one group who had important benefits to gain from PrEP, but didn't necessarily represent the full range of individuals. There's been an increasing recognition of that. The PrEP literature, and this is a good area where there's sort of many hopeful trends. The literature is becoming more representative. There was actually a really exciting study that came out just in the last week or two of twice yearly injectable PrEP that was focused on younger adult and even late adolescent female patients in Africa, a population that's really been underrepresented in prior studies. So thinking about that representativeness in the literature in PrEP is going to be key in designing your campaign. When assessing the potential gaps in a community, and this was the second point, thinking about what's included in the data, stigma can have a huge effect on how local data are collected or recorded. If you're pulling data, for example, from the electronic health record systems of local clinics or local hospital networks, but testing hasn't been available, or because of stigma, clinicians haven't been asking the questions that might identify where the gaps are, the data may not help us as much as we would hope in identifying where the opportunities are. And so we need to think carefully there. The outcomes of a PrEP detailing campaign may reflect some of the inequities faced by patients or clinicians. We need to think about what outcomes are we going to measure? If we're, are we going to track infection rates? Might we be measuring medication filling, which could reflect how well a practice, or an individual patient is able to navigate the hurdles of prior authorization or afford the expenses of co-payments for a drug or for the testing that goes with it. Each of those elements can affect and how you set yourself up, how you interpret them, is going to affect not just what happens with your program, but the sustainability and the future funding of a program, how you communicate about it, how it's perceived by the larger community. So this, I think, is hopefully one way to illustrate for you how thinking about each of these elements in data is absolutely critical when we envision how we're going to use data while thinking hard about equity and about inclusivity. So what does it mean? How do we bring an equity lens to data use and truly incorporate this in our work? The most fundamental element is asking these sorts of questions. How can you be intentional when you're collecting data, when you're analyzing it, when you're interpreting it, and perhaps most importantly at all, communicating about the data relevant for your program to a wide range of engaged parties, whether you're communicating it within your team or to external interested parties? How can you identify and address gaps and inequities? Hopefully some of the ideas I've given you here can get you started on that, but it's really an ongoing effort. And that's why some of what we're doing today is really kicking off a larger conversation with all of you in the community about how we think about an equitable approach to data in our shared field. Some of these may be uncomfortable questions. We're thinking about how we use data to frame challenging, difficult questions about who might be getting care, who might not. How maybe something that was done before either in the healthcare system or even by our own programs, our own departments or institutions, depending on where we sit, how some of those may have, if not directly contributed to inequities, at least not fully addressed them. And we need to be willing to grapple with those questions, to think about how, if we use data to frame them, maybe if there are ways in which sometimes data can contribute to problems, we can be asking and thinking creatively about how we can use data to move in a new direction, to be in a better position for making decisions going forward that can let us, let our programs, let the communities that we serve do better. So there are a few guiding principles I want to leave you with when you think about what the road ahead looks like. First is to be transparent, bringing issues that might come up to light. We talked about doing that when you talk about the literature, doing that when you talk about what data you're collecting. That openness really will serve us well in fostering the kind of discussions that we need to have about data inequity. I've been so impressed over the course of today in our presenters and also in the chat and the questions about how open and transparent all of you are in facing the challenges that arise in our work. Doing that same thing when we think about how to use data is critical for all of us in our teams being able to be more effective. I'd remind you that this is a long process. We can't make everything perfect, but we can be catalysts for improvements in how we collect data, how we use it. Even if you're not the one doing it yourself, you can get those other groups engaged in this discussion, starting to think about it. You may not see that change right away. It may be that we have to invest that time now for changes that will come down the road. But the only way that we get there is to start engaging with these questions about data in the same way that all of you have been grappling with questions about equity in your work, and so thoughtfully talking about it over the course of the day. It's really important to remember that AD remains a field that's committed to the principles of evidence-based care, rigorous use of data, but that by recognizing these limitations, we can be as effective as possible. As with all of AD, we often in our trainings talk about embracing the uncertainty and still moving forward. And that's what I hope I've given you some ideas that you can do as well. I'd say that this is, these ideas, I'm eager for your questions and feedback. I know it is the end of a long afternoon, but the good news is this isn't the end of the conversation, because really what we want to do is hopefully have this be a catalyst for some follow-up that we'll be doing with all of you in the community as we go forward from this think tank to think with you, both the few minutes we have left over the course of tomorrow's day 2 of the summit, but also in our community events going forward.
Great, thanks, Mike. While people are popping questions into the chat, we'll just let folks know how we promise not to leave them up the creek without a paddle. So some things that we can share with you are the Urban Institute links that Anshul dropped in the chat box that we'll make sure you have at the end of tomorrow. Ways to engage with your community, and we can have check-ins about how to do that. Mike, I know you're going to share the idea of a data walk and give us a quick overview of that in a moment. If you actually would like to do that now, please do.
Yeah, I mean, this is, there's a few different ways you do it. The nothing about us without us that came up in the prior presentation is exactly on target. The idea is to bring your data in an accessible format out to the community and share with them, really meeting the community where they are, engaging in, here's the data we have, and really walking alongside them in interpreting it, as opposed to the model of, we are the academics, or we are the health department, and we are sort of telling you about what goes on. It really is taking a more collaborative approach.
So would you say it kind of bridges the gap between academia and lived experience and tries to
Ideal.
kind of combine? All right.
When it's
So
done right, for sure.
data walking and data talking. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Continuing the conversation with your team and leadership. This is the kind of thing, as we talked about at the beginning of the day, where having these hard conversations where it hurts your brain, where you're not sure where the answers are going to come from, where you're not sure what to do, where makes you uncomfortable. Those are normal feelings to wanting to kind of turn something right side up. And so to continue having those conversations and ask questions of your leadership team. Where are we getting our data? Have you ever thought about whether it's equitable and so forth? And then joining us at any of our future community check-ins, we will be talking about all of this good stuff moving forward, including how to do a data walk. We'll have Mike come in as well as other folks who are experts on data and inclusivity as we move ahead in our work as a group. So we have a couple quick questions, Mike, and then we'll wrap up. We have one from Vishal Kinkawala. Hey, Vishal. He wrote, "This is such a great presentation. Connecting back to a previous conversation, how can we involve more tech and AI along with the human aspect into incorporating more of the data into detailing?" Any first pass thoughts on that, Mike?
Great question, Vishal. Thanks. I think I would say that I am no expert on AI, so I don't have sort of a specific answer, but my understanding of it thus far, is that I think of it as a tool. It's a very powerful tool. It's one we're still grappling with. And my suspicion is that much like a lot of the data analytic approaches that that we talked about in this session, there will be some of the ways that we think about how we use it. There'll be ways it's very effective in maybe generating information or synthesizing information for us. But there may be ways, AI certainly has the potential, sort of like that data example I gave about insurance, resources, to perpetuate inequities. That if a lot of AI is sort of synthesizing current information, and current information reflects all the inequities in the system, then what's the risk of AI simply spitting out an answer that seems to sort of harden those troubling trends? So I think, like any other tool, it's really important for all of us to ask hard questions as things like AI become available. We shouldn't turn away a good tool if there's a way we can use it effectively. But I think asking those pointed questions is going to be key.
Thanks, Mike. And to wrap us up, and this is really the question for the day, for folks who are just getting started, or even for folks who have been knee deep in it and just want to know, kind of, am I going in the right direction? Mike, what would you say would be a first thing or a consistent thing anyone could do to build some momentum? This is from Jackie in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great question, Jackie. I think, and I'm trying not to give an answer if it depends, because that's such a frustrating, unhelpful answer to get. I think that for a lot of if you're thinking about your team and your program, I think bringing that equity lens to the literature is if you're thinking about sort of a place to start, that's sort of at the core of what we already do. And so that's a way to start introducing that, to start bringing topics up among, for yourself, among your team, maybe with some of your partners, with your leadership, depending on your organizational structure. And that can be a start, because I know that for some folks really have a lot of access to data, and some of the things I talked about in the latter part of, thinking about how the data are collected, thinking about they're analyzed, may be accessible for some. But if you don't really have access to data or don't have the resources to collect data, I realize that may not feel like something you can do right away. But I think that engagement with the literature is a place that all of us can start. And I think some of them, if we didn't put it in the chat today, I'll make sure we put in the chat tomorrow the piece I was talking about that provided an overview of the clinical guidelines, that New England Journal piece. That can be a good place to start to look and think about, gee, how might some of the guidelines or calculators or other things that I use maybe reflect inequity, and are there ways I can modulate my messages to communicate that to clinicians?
I love that, Mike. And what I think we should do is get that link, feature a screenshot, start tomorrow when Anna and I kick off, and just really talk about what resources are already out there, including an amazing one that Adrienne just dropped in the box called Participatory Action Research, Shifting Power to Communities Through Data. So there's a lot of different ways to start, but I would say a catch-all answer is do your reading, do your thinking, and do your communicating. Start your conversations right there with your team. And if you are a team of one and you don't love talking to yourself, you can talk to us. So thank you so much, Mike. And thank you everyone for just so many great thoughts, feedback, food for thought, just really keeping our brains cranking. I'm sure our brains are very full and ready to squeeze out like a sponge. So with that said, we will spend the next 3 to 4 minutes wrapping up and getting you on out of here. And thanks, Carla. I know you have a question about how we begin to think about creating environments that allow for community ownership of data. I think that we will be doing that a disservice to try to squeeze it into 4 minutes. But Mike, maybe thinking about that and seeing if we can put together some thoughts for the morning could be a great way to go. So I want to thank everyone for a terrific day one. We're going to do a quick wrap up. Anna, over to you for a chat waterfall question just to get our brains moving before we shut them off for the night.
All right. What was one new thing you learned today that you were surprised by or excited about? Bevan says she didn't know what a data walk was. The harm reduction initiative. Focus group questions for AD, the use of AD in harm reduction. Very excited about harm reduction AD. We have a lot of people excited about harm reduction AD, approaches for focus groups, another one for harm reduction, lived experience, harm reduction, racialized as wording, talking about provider stigma. Brad loved the information about the focus groups, loved the discussion on stigma, another person for focus groups. And Jackie says, excited that this is a focus of so many teams, such great national and international reach. And Amy's wrapping us up with lived experience. And one more from Nicole, too much to say, so much food for thought, focus groups, and starting with lived experience.
And I think really across all of this, valuing all of our experiences, valuing your own lived experiences as well. We have a few more in the chat, but let's just wrap up with this last one. Other than public health, what is something that you love? What's something that makes you happy? We did a little bit of this morning, but just remembering when we're overwhelmed by the myriad issues of public health and the healthcare system, what's something that we love? We love houseplants. We love nature. We love NaRCAD. Thank you, Vishal. And the bears, drawing, snow, learning, hazelnut coffee, a juicy nectarine. Why, I like that as well, Carolyn. Walks, my family and health, yoga mats, Magnum mini bars, the community, cats, a wonderful dinner and a bottle of wine, food, sunshine, good books, Costco, more for food and books, watching and playing tennis. Oh yes, Carla, we learned that about you. The view from your front porch, time with family during summer break, vacations. So many good things to be thinking about just to get us out of our heads every now and again. And other folks said that they really loved learning about how advertising and marketing can fuel stigma, how there are limitations in how we collect and analyze our data. And again, it just seems like community is key here, whether it's the community that we're trying to benefit through our work in public health or in our own personal communities that keep us going every day. And of course, there is always overlap. Anna, I'm going to speed through this if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Tomorrow, we've got a welcome and kickoff that's much shorter, and then we're going to get you all right into program development workshops. You can go to Own Your Space. It's a building confidence and embracing your unique skill set course. That'll be a lot of fun. It's for detailers particularly, but if you want to go in and learn how to be a more confident Program manager, you can come in as well. The second one is cultivating commitment, strategies for achieving leadership buy-in. And the third one is community synergy, uniting against health disparities. There are descriptions in the program book online. So please do take a look at those. You'll have a half-hour break, and then we have a best practices spotlight that we are particularly excited about. We're going to learn about the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's work on tuberculosis detailing. And we're also going to hear about gender affirming care. So please do check that out. And then at the end of the day, all of us are going to work on a community roundtable to start thinking about what's the first step for anyone who wants to build an AD campaign that from soup to nuts is inclusive and equitable. So we hope you will join us for any and all of that. Anna, will you wrap us up with our feedback survey?
Yes, thank you all for a terrific day one of our summit. Please fill out our evaluation survey and let us know how we did. We take all of your feedback seriously and apply it to all our future learning events. You'll also be entered into a $250 raffle for a donation to a charity of your choice from our pre-selected list. If you fill out the survey, Anshul popped it into the chat. You can also scan the QR code on the screen, but please, please, please fill it out. It really helps us.
And it shouldn't take you long, 2 minutes
No.
max, unless you want to write more, in which case you can write more, but it's really a quick one. So please let us know where we hit the mark and where we came up short and what we can do differently. Once you've got that open, please have yourselves a lovely afternoon or evening. And thank you for being with us today. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.